Greetings all. Welcome to Mauritania Restoration. I'm glad to be here. It's a wonderful day, wonderful people, great vibes. Today we are here to have the honor of having again speaking to us today, Melanie Vermeij, an alternative journalist from South Africa, currently living in Portugal. She's going to be interviewed by our member Lionel Mashinge, who is one of the board of members for Mauritania Restoration. Great guy. It's going to be a very explosive topic that we need to talk about today because we are exploring African spirituality, mysteries, myths. Most of the stuff that is now considered folklore or, some people believe, some people don't. We're going to dive deep down into the depths of this. We're going to be referring to great names, Credo Mutwa, David Icke, Michael Tillinger, all these people who have rubbed shoulders with Melanie Vermeij. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and leave the floor to Brother Lionel.
Greetings, everybody. Hey, Mel, how you doing?
Hi, guys. Thank you again for having me on. It's great to speak with you.
Yeah, today we're touching on a topic that excites me. I'm quite a big kid. I've got a big imagination, so to speak. My son loves dragons, actually. When he was a kid, it sparks the imagination, doesn't it? And we're going to be touching on legends, things of such a nature that basically on the Southern African plateau, really, because it kind of is not limited to just South Africa or Zimbabwe or just Botswana. It just kind of seems like even goes all the way to Europe and everything else, things you've seen, things that shows that there's been a global influence by these reptilian entities.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So today, just obviously, I watched the other interviews you were asked. You tried to be brief, but you ended up giving quite an in-depth introduction of who you are. Today, feel free, just as short as you like. So for just in case for some of the people who are meeting up for watching for the first time today as well.
Sure. Okay, so if you guys are interested in this body of work, I suppose the place you can dive straight in is to check out my Dragonology body of work. That's dragonology.info. And you'll find 3 seasons of Dragonology with 13 episodes each, 2 documentary films called Chasing the Dragon and my book Spellbreaker. And that's sort of encompassed in the Dragonology body of work. But then there's also the anthropology side, which I get into with my body of work called The Greatest Discovery, which kind of came out of Dragonology in a way. And that deals a lot with ancient mythological sites in Southern Africa. And then if you guys are interested in the books, go check out my website, melvybooks.info, and you'll find my biography and my credentials on there. And please do get in touch if anybody has any questions or queries or wants to give me some information. I'm always looking for more in this area.
That's amazing. That's great to know. So if you heard that, she's got like her own lot of research that's been done there, stuff that's accredited. And again, she if you got to watch the other interview, Mel specified that she's a truth seeker in that sense. So she fact checks a lot of the stuff that she does. She goes out there. She's not one of these random people who just kind of making things up. Like she fact checks, and she's found herself in from listening to the previous interview, she found herself sometimes at the wrong end of certain things, or right end really. Society seems to have the part of us. When I remember growing up, that there was a keen need to suppress certain information, and certain books are outlawed. And certain speakers get into trouble. We've seen what happened with David Icke. Even the way sometimes some people who have the wisdom had an understanding of who Credo Mutwa was, but even sometimes he wasn't truly appreciated even amongst his own people sometimes. So we would really give thanks for people like yourself who are truth seekers and were able to carry that torch for us. And until we kind of lose our ignorance and realize she was onto something that whole time, while we were fumbling in the dark. So yeah. Now today I didn't want to limit it, obviously, to just Nyami Nyami and everything else, because there's other things that I picked up on in your interview with Stan that you had that was extremely fascinating. And there was things to the nature of language, obviously, like how the dragons influenced us in relation to that, and also speaking to how they, in many a sense, help shape the way we perceive society. And one of the questions I was quite intrigued to ask you is that when you go, obviously, like in South Africa to the Cape and the Table Mountain, that you kind of get to see the footprint, that famous footprint that is spoken about, the people who are, the people in the conspiracy theory realm. They love to talk about the giants and etc. What do you know about that in particular?
Well, you have to understand, to give you a bit of context with regards to the giants, is that this iteration of humanity is by no means the first, and that there have been many variations of us. So now I always laugh when you talk about the black and white dichotomy, because there have been people who were, as you know, in parts of Northern Africa, you find pygmies, and you've got pygmies in Greenland, very short little folks, and Polynesia as well, very short people. So of course you've also got the giants, people who were very, very big. And these bones have been found all over the world, giant skeleton bones, massive individuals. So, I mean, just go Google giants and skeletons, and you'll be amazed to see some of the pictures that come up. And even some of the artifacts that have been left behind. I mean, in Japan, they've got things like a sword that is just so big that it's impossible for someone of our size to wield. This clearly belonged to a giant. And not too far away from the museum where the sword is kept, there's this massive, massive boulder that's probably about 20 feet high. It looks quite literally like it was sliced into pieces, 4 pieces, a round boulder sliced into 4 pieces with a big sword. That's the only way it sort of could have been done. It just, when you start to look at some of the archaeological discoveries, which I belong to the crypto archaeology genre of work, you'll find the mainstream academics tend to not want to go down this rabbit hole. You begin to see that first off, the version of history that we are given is completely manufactured and really is not complete at all in terms of educating us as to the greater perspective of humanity, our story, where we came from, and of course those that came before us. And the giants are definitely an iteration of our species in a bigger form that have been here. In fact, I've heard stories, Stani, I don't know if you've heard the same, because you've been in Iraq, about these giants that were found in caves over there by American soldiers. Apparently. So, I mean, you should Google that. I have no idea how true that is, but they could still be alive today.
Oh, that's a true story. It's a true story. So it was a special force unit that was assigned in Kandahar, and in Afghanistan, it's very mountainous, like extremely mountainous. Like it's really hard to maneuver from one place to another. So they were patrolling a particular vicinity of an area, looking for terrorists or the what we know of the Taliban. And so this special forces unit encountered a mountain that had a cave in it, and outside of the cave there was bones. They couldn't really tell if it was bones of an animal or a human. There was just a large number of bones and skeletons just scattered outside of the cave. And in no time out of the cave came out, I think, 11 to 12 foot red-headed huge man. And he looked very barbarian. And I think he had something like a sword or something of that sort. But at that time, they noticed that they had to take contact as soon as possible. So they started shooting after the giant, and unfortunately got hold of one of the special forces, one of the team members, and immediately he was killed. And after receiving fire after a couple of rounds, that's when it fell to the ground. And when that happened, they messaged the headquarters that this is what happened. We need out of this area because we don't understand the kind of enemy that's out here, because that was just one giant. What about if it's a huge population of giants in that particular cave? So at that time, they just needed to get out. So immediately the Apaches came through, but what most importantly they came to do was to get hold of the corpse and to make sure nobody talks about it ever again. They were strictly told if they talked about them, they would have breached their security clearance. So, well, you have to have a security clearance in order to do those kind of operations, anyways, because you're really not supposed to talk about whatever happens while you're doing your operations on deployment. And so they boxed that huge thing and flew it, and it was not on media. Nobody talked about it. That was it.
There we go. So, it's a good place to jump in on this is even in mythological accounts, almost across the world, you'll find descriptions of beings that are larger than our average size. So for me, I think there's enough evidence to suggest that, yeah, absolutely, these beings have existed. They may still exist in present times.
And yeah, that is absolutely amazing, which is a kind of like an interesting segue to the next question that I was thinking on in relation to stone cave paintings that we find. So obviously, like sticking to factual kind of stuff now, don't worry, people. I will go off the reservation soon enough. But right now, I want to kind of stick to stuff that we kind of know. So obviously in Zimbabwe, there's a place called Shower where there's stone cave paintings. And quite interesting enough, in Botswana, there's a place of a similar name, Shaba. But it kind of translates, obviously, dialectically speaking, it's the same thing, white, help me out, Stan? So white stone, right? Dombo Shava, or red stone, white stone, Shava, red. Shava would be red, isn't it?
I'm not quite sure as to Shava if it's something that's light in complexion. I'm not clear on that.
Yeah, so it's a fair skin, red, light, right, so to say, in stone. And these places, quite interestingly, the place in Botswana, just like the place in Zimbabwe, have got like Khoisan, or we believe linked to the Khoisan people. And Domoshawa is more like, it's not north, but you kind of be going you're going further up now. So it's quite far away from Botswana, so to speak. It's not that close. And you're seeing evidence of these people leaving their footprint there. And basically, have you find any correlation in regards to, have we managed to kind of like map and see where these people are? Because quite interestingly, there's the people called the Hadzabe people in Tanzania, right? And they're the only tribe that is known that they're the tribal bush peoples. They literally live on the land. They smoke cannabis. They literally stalk bees and try to go grab the honey, and the honeycomb, they eat off that. They eat small birds. Literally, that's all they do. And I think Tanzania is just like in Botswana. They've got the parts of the land, like it's now reserved just for them, and people can't go in there or hunt or anything like that. And they actually speak with clicking noises as well. And they're the only tribe known to speak with clicking noises, just like the Khoisan. So I know that's a field of expertise that you're quite knowledgeable in. So I wanted to find out if you had anything in regards to that as well.
Yes, the language is always interesting because the language is the footprint. It's the key that shows you that there is some kind of link between them. Now, obviously, just to give you a synopsis, the European equivalent to show that, all the Europeans are related is through the language, which sort of comes from Latin. All the European languages are pretty much a derivative of Latin, including English. Where you've got the words that have similar roots or are phonetically similar, it normally means that there's some sort of correlation or connection between them. And what it also shows for me is there was a pre-existing language before the other languages came, and perhaps it was a language that could have been global, because you come across for example, some of the native African languages have similar root words to some of the Native American languages. which is interesting because that's another continent altogether. The root words are very similar for certain things, and they all have a similar symbolic, allegorical reference. And so I think absolutely there has been a connection between different regions, and that can be seen through the languages. And of course, art and symbols like that is a language. It's a method of communication. Back then, those kind of artworks weren't really done for aesthetic purposes, I don't think. They were more done in terms of recording, for ritual purposes. Often rituals were recorded symbolically with artwork. And the kind of appreciation of art only developed sort of in our most recent cultural evolution. Back then, this really putting that much effort into creating a graphic on the wall, because first you have to collect the ochre or the paints, or you have to carve it in. It's a lot of effort. It was very effortful, and anything that goes beyond just basic survival need, by basic survival, eating, sleeping, drinking, breathing. Okay, so anything that goes beyond basic survival need can technically be termed as a ritual if it's effortful, done at a specific place at a specific time and with a specific purpose, which you probably find most of these carvings are done with. And the specific purpose is to communicate a message from the past to the people of the future about something that these people believed were important to them. And that's really why you find these symbols and characters turning up in people's mythologies, because it's the things that people find important which find place in their mythology.
Wow, that's absolutely amazing. And also something that you did mention as well, which obviously your knowledge base is shining through here in regards to being linked to the royal house of the Khoisan as well, and that information as well. So obviously, like a lot of the stuff you say, it is fact-based. This is stuff that is, well, we're talking like on a scholarly level now. It's no longer just opinions or what we think. This is what we know. Quite interesting. I would like to share. Stan knows I've just been absolutely abusing this book, and it's called the Zimbabwe Epic. You may have seen it. And basically, you definitely would have spotted the imagery in it. And just to kind of give people a bit of context in regards to what we're talking about, what was found within the cave paintings. Hopefully, I'm not in a bad angle.
Lots of serpents in there. Let's see if you can notice that serpentine imagery.
And that's another thing that's amazing, because without, as bad as it is, with the lack of our education, some of us would not be able to interpret this image correctly. Would just look like squiggly lines to us if we're honest, because unless you have done that kind of, you've studied it, you've gone to learn about it, you just kind of look at it from an innocent mind's eye. You think, oh yeah, they just probably run out a bit of paint, so they just did a squiggle there. You know what I mean? So it is important also to be able to have someone with the educational background and training to be able to decipher and break what that image was about as well.
Can I just say, with regards to that image, what you just have to take into consideration, one simple thing, and we've spoke about this, Sunny, we spoke about this the other day, is the oldest effigy, surviving statue to have been dated, sits in Botswana in Sedilo Hills, and it takes the form of a serpent. Now that is significant. So if the oldest ritual site to have yet been discovered, the oldest sort of effigy or carving to have yet been dated was found to depict a serpent, then obviously it becomes interesting that you find serpents on nearly every single amazingly huge ancient monument pyramid structure around the world. I mean, what's those pyramids at Teotihuacan in Mexico, they have serpent heads coming out the bottom of the pyramids. They carved all over the T-shaped stones that are at Göbekli Tepe, which they have themselves caused a lot of controversy in the archaeological world, because they have been dated to be around 13,000 years old. And bearing in mind, back then we were still thought to be hunters and gatherers, never mind being capable of constructing megalithic structures with multi-ton massive blocks of stone and then carving relief carvings onto them that had symbolic allegories. So what you need to understand with this is that certain symbols, particularly things like the serpent, the zodiac, they have traveled through time, and they are indicative of a very particular thing, and that is there has been a control structure over humanity going back several generations, several iterations of civilization. When I say an iteration of civilization, I mean a rise of a civilization and then a collapse due to cataclysm or something like that, like the great biblical floods. Ended one iteration of civilization, then we had to start all over again. That's what I'm talking about. And there have been many of those. And those many cataclysms have actually been brought about, my belief is, by the creators of our various past civilization and present civilization, the creator gods being the dragons. And their symbol being the serpent. Dragon means great serpent. The serpent symbol turns up in ancient artwork everywhere. And of course, it is always indicative of the same thing, which is the archons, these controlling overlords that messed with our DNA, turned us into slaves, and are still behind the scenes controlling everything today.
And I'll just like to throw in this scientific fact for skeptics. And the passage reads, the human eye can only see between 430 to 770 THz. Our ears can only detect sound between 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz. These ranges make up a fraction of the total sound and light frequency range. This means there is a lot going on around that we cannot see or hear.
Yes, absolutely. Whatever people talk about interdimensional beings or ghosts. Let's look at the term ghost, a very prosaic, generic term everyone can kind of identify with through movies or whatever. They exist on a plane that's kind of beyond what we can see. And sometimes they happen to move into our frequency range and we see a glimmer or a shadow or a face, some manifest or something. But there is definitely all around us, even perhaps in the space that you're sitting in, things going on that are not perceivable by our 5 sense awareness level. I think there are times when you can have your sixth sense, the hairs in the back of your neck stick up. You can feel, well, I'm not alone in this room. I've had that a few times in my life where I definitely felt there's a presence and I'm almost expecting somebody to start talking to me that I can't see. But yeah, that's a very good point, because I think that whatever these beings are, if they do not make themselves visible to us, they absolutely are able to exist around us and interact and manipulate our realities, insert themselves, insinuate themselves into certain situations within people's lives at times as well, for whatever reason.
Yeah, just to add on, firmly going off the reservation now, but yeah, I will come back. I was talking about Nyami Nyami, but since we started delving into that part of the conversation, there's quite a lot of really cool series by Carl Sagan who touches on that in regards to the third and fourth dimension and different frequencies, and how as three-dimensional beings, how we would perceive something if something from the fourth dimension came into our sphere. It would look exactly like that, ghostly. It wouldn't be something that wouldn't be able to completely comprehend when we did see it. So that's something to add on to that as well.
Yeah, for sure.
Right. Quite interestingly now, keeping back to the theme, is which I always found really interesting, is like initially, I do not know if that's coming across well.
Yeah, I can see that's in Nyama Nyama. That's the mythological icon supposedly from Zimbabwe.
Yes, and what one of the things that I used to find extremely fascinating, because I come from a family that were like hunter-gatherers, and well, they were quite Humbarume, which means a great hunter. And these guys, like my great-grandfather, he was legendary known. A lot of the people used to speak about him because in Chishawasha, where we come from in Harare, we got a lot of hills that go up and down. And one of the troubles that we used to face is there's loads of elephants and there were loads of snakes. And because of that, that combination used to get like a lot of issues with the elephants because they would stampede a lot and cause a lot of drama. So what he used to do, he used to go to different areas, clear the snakes. Some of them he would relocate, he wouldn't kill them. And some of them he would, depending, because he was quite knowledgeable. These guys were quite savvy, and he actually did some work with the Selous scouts very early on in regards to teaching them basic tracking in that part of the world. Now, what was interesting for me is a lot of the feedback and the way they used to describe the snake is when I got older, my son managed to get this game, Gods of War. That's in regards to Kratos. And in it, they got the theme of the world serpent snake in Midgard, and it kind of the way it wraps around the Middle Earth. And Stanley's heard this story. People of a certain age have heard this story. There was a very notorious snake in Salisbury at a certain time, just outside Salisbury, going to Mazoe. And allegedly, this snake, when it started crossing the road, it would start crossing, the head would start at 6 a.m. crossing the road, and it would only complete crossing the road at 6 p.m. So it would take 12 hours to pass on. So because of this, one of my friends, he's probably watching now. This is how we kind of started communing, talking about this. And I was like, oh, my great granddad, you know, he used to tell me some really cool stories. There was a snake, but he said he couldn't kill it because it was part of the land. It was spiritually tied to the land. So killing and harming the snake would cause a great disharmony. So we couldn't do it. It's bad, you know. And then he was like, so I was saying it. And then his mom was in the background. And his mom was like, oh, my dad was supposed to go and do that because they're from Zambia. So they went to the lengths that at this point in Salisbury that they were seeking far and wide different healers, hunters, and people to be able to deal with this as well. Now, what fascinates me, right, is if you were, this is difficult. I know you're going to be very hard, but I'm going to ask if you can do this. How large or how big is the snake phenomenon? Because obviously we know, like when we look at medicine, the staff medicine, the very symbol of medicine, we've got the serpent wrapping around the staff in regards to well-being. In our cultural tradition, our healers, not healers, Mondoro, our spirit mediums, the most powerful ones are protected by Ruvambira. What breed? Ruvambira? What snake? Oh, like a cobra. Like, you know, it protects where they live. You know, they're guardians of things.
Ruvambira, is it not a black mamba? I think it's a black mamba.
Yeah, black mambas, you know, they protect them. So the moment we see that this snake, it's the type of thing that, okay, cool, when we shouldn't kill this because it's here, it's protecting something, you know. So people normally would just kind of sidestep it and they wouldn't attack it. And this is something that they used to do culturally. Now, do you think that this is something that in just like a bird inertly knows, or a rat or a rodent knows, even though it hasn't been told, in your DNA, you're fully aware that this is what it used to be, so we continue this on, you know, because is it a coincidence that all of us, you know, the Chinese, they're crazy about dragons, you know, the Norse, they got the great serpent, you know, the native Indians, they've got snake in mythology. Africa has its own as well.
Yeah, well, it's a very good question. And I think the way you ask it is overcomplicated this because it actually is very simple. Let me bring it back to this one thing. The reason why you find this recurring symbolism of the serpent in every single major mythology across the world is because this is in fact a real phenomenon. You can't have something that repeats in different cultures that have existed in different places in different times and claim that it's a different thing. They all link to the same thing, which is these dragon overlords, the archons, the demons, the angels, the devils, the gods, whatever you want to call them. They've been called the Naga, they've been called all sorts of things, the Gorgons, Quetzalcoatl. They come in a number of different names. And even all the angels of the pantheon, or Christian pantheon of angels, all have the word El, like Michael, Gabriel. And El is a symbol, a word shortening of the Elohim, which in the Hebrew Bible is in fact a reference to the Anunnaki. Now the Anunnaki, you have the word Nak, which is also the root word of snake. So if you actually start to look at all of this, what it points out to is all these different beings and all these different cultures that are supposedly serpentine, in long serpent-like, dragon, perhaps some of them winged serpents like you have Quetzalcoatl in Mesoamerica. All of these things are referring to the same thing. They're all referring to the same thing, which is a serpentine deity that controls us, that gave us everything, our knowledge, geometry. The word angle has the root word A-N-G-E-L-E in it, which is just another L-E. If you switch around, it's E-L, that's angel. And angel comes from the root word anguiem, or angui, which is Latin for serpent. So if you start to actually look at all the root words, my body of work, Dragonology, basically teaches you how to decode the dragon language that is encoded into our language, because there's dragon root words encoded into all of our language. And you can see the connections, or the evidence there, of these beings having either existed or still existing within our reality, here and now, controlling things from behind the scenes. But they were at a certain point very much consciously acknowledged by people, depicted in iconography, artwork, paintings, symbolically represented. For example, you have the dove in Catholic religion is a symbol of the serpent. And you just have to look again at the Latin words, because columba in Latin is dove and colubra is serpent. And the two words are almost identical to each other. That's why Christopher Columbus, because he really was a member of the secret society, his name was not Christopher Columbus, Christopher Collins. They put Columbus on so that those in history who read back realize he was controlled by the secret societies that ultimately serve the dragon cult, which is the cult that controls our, the culture of our reality, and has done ever since we were redesigned genetically. And I think that starts probably about 250,000 years ago. But before then, humanity's in our present form, our presence on this planet isn't really known. We perhaps had a bigger form known as the Neanderthal man. But one thing is for sure is that if you look at all the religions and all the creational mythologies, you always come across the same sort of pattern, and that we were created by a serpent, dragon, deity, god, archon, whatever you want to call them, and that we have been given beasts in a field, like bushmen traveling, eating with the land, living off the land. That is our natural state. What we have been is cultured, like bacteria in a petri dish that is cultured by scientists. We've been cultured by these dragon entities. They imbued us with their knowledge of masonry, how to build temples to honor them, how to agriculture, okay, how to farm. That was knowledge given to us by the dragons. That's in the Sumerian tablets. You can see the clay tablets where the god Enki gave the plow to man to use in the fields, and taught humanity which seeds to grow and all that kind of thing, which is why in plant etymology you find tons of dragon root words as well. Fruit, vegetables, all imbued with dragon etymology, because they gave us the gift of being able to plant a piece of land, always have food available instead of having to go and forage, scavenge, and hunt. They gave us the technology to heal, because obviously they had advanced technologies which they used and passed down, or information and knowledge which they passed down to an initiated priest class of healers. And this is why the god of healing, Asclepius, is depicted. It's a Greek god of healing. Asclepius has got the staff with a serpent that goes around it. They sometimes say the caduceus, which actually belongs to Mercury or Hermes, Trismegistus. It has the intertwining serpents that go around with the two wings. That's the caduceus symbol. And that's sometimes also used for medicine, although it's not per se the most prevalent symbol of medicine, because Mercury and stroke Hermes were actually the gods of commerce, and really the gods of medicine and healing was Asclepius and Asclepius's daughter Hygiena, and both of them are depicted in Roman carvings that are in the Vatican as having serpents around them. Much like you'll find many carvings of Athena, who is the patron goddess of Athens, also has a serpent cloak. She has a serpent pet that's depicted with her in her carvings. And you'll find the serpent symbolism turning up with a lot of these gods, so to speak, because what they are in fact representing is that these gods, which have been given human features, actually have a serpentine countenance as their real being. Whether they shapeshift between the serpent's shape and the human shape or whatever, it is absolutely being depicted symbolically and allegorically through these artworks and sculptures.
And I just got a really direct question. We kind of need clarity on this, if I can pitch in a little bit. Um, and from all the accounts I've heard from Credo Mutwa and in our Zimbabwean folklore, Pasichigare, which means a time when there was purity to a point where you would go to a tree if you had not found anything to hunt, and food would be provided. Or if you really were in dire need of an eland or a kind of an antelope to hunt it, you wouldn't have to chase after it. It would be there waiting for you. Like stories like that, accounts from Credo Mutwa about the coming of the Chitauri when there was so much humidity, earth was beautiful, people did not talk, they only communicated telepathically. And then came Chitauri, then came the serpents. So that obviously tells us that they did not create us, but they genetically manipulated us with their technology. So they found an earth with its life forms there, created, not by them, by something else. Let's go direct on that. Who would have created, or who had created Earth before the Anunnaki came? And this might be able to help us have an idea of our spiritual polarities of good and evil.
Yeah, that's a good question. Not one I'm qualified to answer. I'm a journalist, I work with evidence. If I was a spirit medium or perhaps a channel, I'd ask these questions to an advanced race and hopefully someone would answer me back. But to go that far back or that deep into our cosmic imprint is pretty difficult. And just to touch on a point you were saying, if they've genetically modified us, we are in fact different species. Homo sapien is clearly different to what Neanderthal was. Neanderthal suddenly disappeared. I mean, they must have killed these guys off and then took their DNA and made them into, little feeble us with all our diseases and issues and we can't, our white skin gets burnt in the sun, so we're not well adapted to the environment because we're genetically modified. No other animal on the planet needs the concept of a wardrobe because, they naturally evolved their protective covering. We didn't, because we were created in a laboratory and we need all this artificial stuff around us, heating, cooling, air conditioning, walls with paint and bricks and mortar. No other animal needs that. Just human beings. All these artificial mechanisms for us to survive. Why? Because we're not genetically designed to survive in the environment in which we now find ourselves being planet Earth, because we are in fact a modified organism. So there's a lot of complications to our existence, a lot of things, auxiliary things that we need for our comfort and survival. Not to mention the fact we're also the most sickly creatures on the planet with the most genetic defects and diseases. There is no other animals that has the vast variety of things that we have wrong with us. That's also largely to do with the deliberate intake of pollution and toxins and bad food and pharmaceutical drugs and vaccines, but also to do with the fact that we are genetically modified. Our bodies have a huge amount of genetic defects, more than any other creature on the planet. So, yeah, I mean, to talk about what we were before, or what species we came from. I hear all sorts of wonderful stories from the many wonderful people I've worked for about the fact that there was a time when we could levitate, where we just had to will food to us. It was there. Didn't vocalize. We would communicate telepathically, all these kind of things. Again, this is just things I've heard from people who've got this information from varying sources. It's not something that I have ever found direct evidence of. Like, I have found direct evidence of the dragons. The evidence is everywhere. It can be found in every cultural mythology that there are these dragon gods that have existed, that did create humanity. To differing unconnected accounts that are similar normally point to truth. And that's what we have with this particular body of work, is no matter where you look, you can't miss them. They've been hiding in plain sight from us because we've never been taught what they really are or the true form of them. They've been whitewashed over with stories of, God with his tablet of 10 rules you mustn't do floating on a cloud. That's the image we have of the gods, when in fact the gods are nothing like that. They are terrifying dragon-like beings that, have been rumored to eat flesh and children, and there's sacrifices made to them. I mean, the concept of sacrifice is throughout the Bible. The concept of sacrifice is in every aspect of humanity's existence today, and all these sacrificial rituals which exist along with our ritual holidays like Christmas and Halloween, they're all symbolically depicted in these ritual holidays. So it's all there. All the cult ritualism that's been imbued to us by these dragons is inextricably interwoven into the fabric of our reality in various ways, through our language, through the symbols, through the cultural activities we engage in: holidays, sports, dancing, theater. It's just there. You cannot escape it.
Wow, yeah, that's absolutely amazing. Thanks for asking that one, Komatamuka. That was a very fascinating one, trail of thought, which kind of brings me on to some of the things that I've ended up kind of not necessarily going in the right order. I'm just kind of letting this happen holistically as we kind of flow in. Quite interesting. You did make a mention that also we used to create, and we still kind of do create temples, and we've kind of seen a lot of the monuments that have been left behind. Quite interesting, fascinating. We've got the Heroes Acre. It's got this long monument type of thing, and it's got the fire flame at it, and no one knows what that's about. Kind of go to Washington D.C., same thing. Go to Whitehall. It's got kind of monuments that you see that don't really make any sense to. For us, doesn't serve a purpose, So we do have a lot of symbolism that does exist. But I also do wonder about, we do have places in Zimbabwe, right? Like the Chinoi caves that we have, also coined Sinoi. And it was a place of great war, allegedly. And during that point of time, people were thrown to their deaths to appease the spirits into this great pool. But then I don't know if you came across anything like this. It would be good for me to find out if you did during your research. Later on, after the independence, we had a couple of, I won't say that marine biologists, that would be the correct term. They were trying to figure out the depth and trying to find out what level of marine life you have in these underwater pools in Chinoi caves. Something tragic happened, and one of the divers vanished. They sent countless of crews to try to go recover them. A lot of financial investment was thrown into it to manage to try to get this lad out, but it was never found again. Quite interestingly enough, after don't quote me on the period of time, but it seems something just over a year, the person's physical body reappeared in limestone caves in Zambia. Right? So there was a little bit like things where there's things like that. So you got Chinoi caves, we got issues like that. So it's kind of like, it's to the point when you go in, they say, don't swear, don't say anything weird when you're in there because you can vanish. And you find a very similar theme that when you go to Inyangani, Mount Inyangani, which I believe the elder Credo Mutwa used to reference, where he had gone to get some teachings and that, because it's the type of place when you go, when we went for a school trip, when you go up, they say you're going to see some deformed looking trees. Some of the trees look like they've got breasts. Do not laugh and point, right? Or you will vanish. If you do or say anything silly, something bad will happen to you. So this is the kind of thing we were told as kids. You kind of got the fear of God in you when you're going up this mountain. It is bizarre, and that part of it, because it's in the Eastern Highlands, so you kind of like going up, and then you kind of hit by loads of mist. And it's like, and then it's kind of like a completely different planet. I don't know, Stanley, the last time you've been to Nyangani, but it's like completely different climate you get there. It's really cold, and the whole atmosphere is different, And I was wondering, do you think, is it quite possible, since we don't have any physical monuments resurrected in these particular places, that there's certain places on Earth that do carry a certain energy that is conducive for these quote unquote reptilian creatures, like my brother Stan has mentioned before around Metopos, and we have these weird occurrences in these weird places. I don't know, is there something that you came across during your research?
There's definitely places. Look, first you need to understand that 2/3 of the Earth's surface is covered by water, and we've not even really discovered more than 5% of what is under that water. I mean, we're discovering lost cities and all sorts as it is. So, yeah, absolutely. That's a fascinating story you told me about those divers. But I do think that there may very well be an inner Earth, a hollow Earth scenario. There's been lots of interesting bodies of research put forward about cave openings in Antarctica and UFOs that have been seen coming in and out of them, that sort of thing. I mean, I reckon there could very well be an extraterrestrial race living on Earth, tandem to us, in parts of the world that we can't easily access. They might be better adapted to the cold than we are, so they can live in icier regions. We may not be the only people living on this planet. We probably, it may have been people, beings that have been here always. We're the bugs crawling around on the surface, okay? They've always maybe been here on the inside of the Earth. But what I do know is, with regards to the caves is very fascinating, because one thing you keep coming across in mythologies across the world is how whatever particular prophet or leader of a particular cultural religion, be it Muhammad, be it Buddha, they all receive their instruction from a godly being, sometimes said to be serpentine, sometimes said to look like an angel with wings, but an angel is in fact a dragon. They receive their instructions in caves, always. It's just in almost every religion, sacred caves. So I have to really ask some questions that, I've had little bits of information and testimonies coming from people who've said they've seen some of these beings, in reptilian beings and dragon-like entities, in some very deep caves that they were navigating in China and whatnot. So, yeah, they could absolutely be living in there, be they the dragons or be they other beings. Don't forget, they're always talking about, I've watched National Geographic Channel quite a bit, when they talk about these isolated caves and water, and they find these creatures that have existed there in their own ecosystem for thousands of years and that have survived. So if we're constantly finding little places like this where you've got these uniquely evolved creatures who is tiny, what's not to say that a slightly more intelligent and advanced creature, perhaps not human, but certainly with advanced capacities, to the point where they could operate or create technology that exists somewhere in tandem on this planet that we're not accessing. Maybe the military and the intelligence apparatus and the secret societies know who or what they are, perhaps even work alongside them or cooperate with them with regards to their terms. They could even be the ones controlling the whole scene, whatever advanced race that is. But I think there's plenty of testimony, evidence, places, opportunities for this scenario to be happening. And it's probably been going on for, even before our existence. This planet has had its fair share of visitors throughout its existence. And you see that constantly with these out-of-place artifacts that turn up. Things that are ridiculously old, like, for example, a swatch of fabric in a piece of amber that's supposed to be 3 million years old. How did fabric, woven fabric that's made by human hands, end up in a piece of amber, which amber is the fossilized resin of a tree? And, you go, well, that's conscious, intelligent design made that little cross section of fabric with the fibers that got caught in the amber, and we're not supposed to have existed back then. So what was it that made that piece of fabric? And, was it human? Was it another being of intelligent design? I don't have enough evidence either way. What I can say is that I do think that we'd be crazy to think we're the only ones here. That's for sure. Or, for that matter, that we are at the top of the food chain, because we're not.
Yeah, I mean, that's where it's really fascinating. It gets interesting. Obviously, we got the Dogon, and then obviously got the Zulu people, and I coined them intentionally, even the San people, because they actually use point of references to the heavens to show the point of origin of the people who made them and put them on this place. They say they literally, their origin story is like, yeah, we were made and we got left here. Yep. Yeah, but the person, they made us and put us here. Yeah, but the people, they come from that way. They're not. So yeah, we obviously, Amazulu means, from the heavens. That's straightforward. The Dogons, for years, they thought people were quirky. That was the most fascinating documentary I watched, until they realized that, oh no, they're putting a serious B, and the whole time, like, how is that possible? That's not visible from the human eye. So those are things that, which are completely, someone must have translated to us, or hardwired it in our DNA,
Well, I think that these are culturally preserved stories of events that happened in the past that are passed down. And, I've been enjoying looking at some of and learning more about Africa, because for so long, mainstream historians have relegated Africa to a place in barbarous tribes where nothing really happens. Beautiful country, beautiful landscape, but nothing of much cultural interest. And nothing could be further from the truth, because you've got all these incredible kingdoms that have come and gone. I mean, you're finding palaces and ruins turning up in the Sahara all the time, because that was once a lush tropical landscape. Even the area around the Sphinx is corroded. It's got water erosion, which shows that was probably a tropical area where lots of water was once falling, not a desert like it is today. And I think that so much of Africa's history has been lost. And it really is because of the mainstream academics, westernized sort of academic institutions that have just really downplayed the importance of Africa's contribution to history, I suppose. They've kind of been written out, almost like they didn't really matter, didn't really exist, nothing much went on there. But then you start getting into what is there. And I spoke a bit about this the other day. For example, the Edo culture of Benin, is now the city of Benin, and I think it's near Nigeria. Mm-hmm. And it's an amazing, and there is a massive wall where the palace it's like a ditch, a huge big freaking land work, which is dug around what used to be the royal palace. And it's a massive land work. You start looking at some of what it used to look like. It used to look very much like the city of Atlantis, because here's the other thing that people don't realize is that Atlantis, and this is also quite interesting information, Atlantis was in Mauritania. I don't know if you've ever looked at the information about the Eye of the Sahara. It's called the Ricot structure. And it's basically where Atlantis was. So there also used to be stories about the Nile River also flowing from east to west, and that the sun used to ride on the river from obviously rise in the east and go to the west. The Nile came down, but there also was from Atlantis all the way across to Ethiopia, what they called the East and Western Nile. The Nile legendarily flowed east to west. Now that's, if you go through certain satelliting imagery, you can sort of see the remainders of the riverbed that has kind of been washed away when the big tsunami came in and made the Sahara Desert. But you've certainly got a hell of a lot more going on that's been sort of wiped from history through cataclysm, dismissal of African history. But yes, absolutely, I believe that Atlantis, and I think I've got enough substantial proof to prove that it was in fact in Mauritania. In fact, there's a range of mountains just to the north of the structure that I believe was the city of Atlantis, called the Atlas Mountains, which is goes into what's the area over there? Morocco. That's the Atlas Mountains. Atlantis. Okay, so the Atlas Mountains surrounded the city of Atlantis. And even in Plato's description, he says there's a massive set of mountains to the one side of the rounded, circular, concentric circle-shaped city of Atlantis, and then to the other side it's surrounded by farmlands. And when you look down with satellite imaging, you can see on the other side they have the same striations on the ground that you find around Sedila Hills, which is the agricultural canal scars that are left over from when that was an agricultural landscape. Of course, now in the Sahara Desert, it's all desert, but you can see where those canals used to be to create this farming land around the city of Atlantis that fed the city. And Atlantis was said back in its time to be one of the most technologically advanced cities in the world. And they were the ones that gave the riding of horses to humanity. a lot of, there's a lot of things, a lot of magic, and all sorts of things that are associated with this place. And of course, said to be the origins of what became the Egyptian culture. The Egyptians had to move further east when the city of Atlantis was succumbed to a tsunami, and that's where the Egyptians come from. They've got that written on the Temple of Horus. They actually got this whole epic written out, how they came from this city which was submerged in the ocean from the west, and they moved east, and they couldn't find their way back because their holy river was also taken away, which is the Nile that flows from east to west. So there's so much of this that has been wiped away. And the other interesting thing is that the whole of Africa at one point, I don't know if you know this, was actually everything south of the Sahara and Libya was known as Ethiopia, right down to South Africa. Ethiopia is only a tiny little section now above Kenya. It's landlocked on all sides, doesn't have ocean access, but the whole of Southern Africa, look at ancient maps of Africa from about 1700s. You'll see the whole of Southern Africa is called Ethiopia. What we now call the Atlantic Ocean was called the Ethiopian Ocean. And the word Ethiopia actually is very interesting because it too has two distinct dragon root words, and indicating Africa was the land of the dragon. And there's dragon mythologies in just about every single part, be it Zimbabwe, be it Botswana, go further north into the Congo. There's the stories of Mami Water. I don't know if you know Mami Water. She's the serpentine.
Yeah, we call it Njuzu, which is basically mermaid.
Yeah. Well, she's also said to either be a scaled, long, either serpentine body or a fish body. Now, mermaids are actually a symbolic allegory of dragons, just like sirens are a symbolic allegory of dragons. Sirens and mermaids are very similar. So, but you have to understand that these various mythological figures that have emerged from mythology, basilisks, harpies, they're just different names for the same thing, which are dragons or serpent deities. They, in different cultures, have been interpreted artistically in different ways. But if you understand how to decode the symbols of these various beings, they're normally winged or they've got scales, things that would associate them to being a dragon.
That is absolutely fascinating. And then brings me into quite a peculiar one. Right. So I came across this book because I was doing a bit of lineage research in regards to my family. And my great granduncle was one of the first head teachers, the headmasters in Shawasha, which was right next to the Jesuits. And in this was there's this thing that we still argue about today within the family, trying to figure out who's done what. So in this part, right, they talks about this is what they're writing here. So perhaps you have an old manuscript you would like to publish in proceedings, such as a genial invitation received by Gerhard to contribute African perspectives and happily accepted as enabling to do so. The old manuscript, which I would like to be published, is a remarkable account of the Shona culture as lived in the past by the Shawasha people. It was compiled and written in the early 1930s by a boarding school master, the late Mr. Simon Tawane, which was my great-grandfather's younger brother who put this together. So now, the reason I came across this, the manuscript was actually entitled which means the livelihood and the day-to-day life of Black people within northern Chinamora people, which is northern Shawasha, which is kind of north of Zimbabwe. What was fascinating about it is that in this, they actually excuse, they say, Vatone's penchant for larding his valuable ethnographic account with lengthy lists of the cultural items associated with each institution, which he describes. Exhaustive inventories are such a feature of his style as to inhibit easy study and presentation for publication, as is the absence of editorial organization of the whole text. For these reasons, I have attempted to honor his memory by providing a version stylistic. So basically, I remember when I spoke to my nephew, now he's a university lecturer, and he said he remembers they had remember the I forget what size textbooks that they used to have, and he used to write, he used to sit at the foot while his granddad used to recount different things, and he used to write, and he said he filled in something like 16 textbooks, and then these got handed over to the Jesuits, right? So here's my thing to you. In your research, how much have you found that the Jesuits have taken, let's say, to the Vatican and have kept for themselves and kind of given us these little measly dribs and drabs and taken out the stuff that we know that, look, this it's a nice story, but there's something missing here. There's something that is not quite making sense. Have you yourself found this in your research?
Yes, they are the guys. I mean, when you want to bring it up to the penultimate people who control everything on behalf of the dragons, it comes back to the Jesuits in the Vatican. The superior general of the Jesuits is known as the Black Pope, and he has a higher rank than the actual Pope we know, which is just a puppet, a figurehead of an institution. He has no real power. The Vatican is ultimately controlled by the Jesuits, and the Jesuits have are just a very interesting organization. I don't want to use the wrong words here. They have an oath. It's called the Extreme Oath of the Jesuits. And they actually swear allegiance at the point of a sword, or they have, while they kneel and take this oath, they've got a sword at their throat, and they swear by an oath by punishment of death if they do not fulfill their oath. And it's a very, very strict oath. It's called the Extreme Bloody Oath of the Jesuits. And in there, they talk about murdering babies by smashing their heads against the wall. That's one of the things they say. We will annihilate people from this planet who do not serve us. We will take their babies and smash their heads against the walls, be it by the point of the bullet, or the leaden bullet, or point of the poniard, which is a steel sword. Or the strangulation cord, or poisoning. Poisoning is a big thing. They love to poison. They're assassins. There's a very good book by a guy called Eric John Phelps. He's a minister, a Protestant minister, who wrote this book called Vatican Assassins. And if you want to find out about what the Jesuits are really all about, to me, he's got the third edition of this book out. The third edition is probably 3 times as big as the first edition. And it's got all the evidence in it. Or I actually go into quite a great detail in my book, The South African Guide to the Global Conspiracy, about the Jesuits. Now, you guys are from Zimbabwe. Let's just have a look at how that affects you, because what's your crazy, the previous prime minister, what is his name? Mugabe, right? Mugabe has been surrounded by Jesuits his entire life. He was raised, I think it was Katuma Jesuit Mission was where he was educated.
Yep,
he's been absolutely Jesuit puppet from the get-go. In fact, when it came time for him to resign and pass on to the next person, who was the person that negotiated the whole thing? It was a Jesuit priest, okay? And the same Jesuit priest controls the next guy that comes along. So Zimbabwe is controlled by the Jesuits. It always has been, because the people in place were placed there by the Jesuits, educated, indoctrinated, inculcated, and controlled by the Jesuits. So that's who Mugabe really serves. So from a Zimbabwean perspective, that's the direct connection there. But in every other perspective, what you need to look at is the fact that the Jesuits control all of the secret societies and knight orders. So every single person that gets knighted, okay, and whether they're a Knight of St. John, a Knight of Malta, they are ultimately responsible to the Jesuits. The Jesuits control all of those knight orders. The Jesuits control what is known as the Mafia Commission. You might know it in America as the mob, okay? That is, they control that. You might know that the Italian mafia are very Catholic. It's because they're controlled by the Jesuits. The Hells Angels, okay, are controlled by the Jesuits. You'll notice the Hells Angels have angel wings on the back of the skulls that on their jackets. That's because, of course, the dragon influence there. So they control the Central Intelligence Agency. The Jesuits control the cocaine and heroin trade across the world. They control the pharmaceutical industries. They control the industrial military complex, and they control the entertainment industry. They control it all. So there isn't a single high-profile person in politics today that isn't beholden to the Jesuits via a well-distanced intermediary, such as some sort of fraternity, be it Freemasons, be it something a little bit more sinister like Bohemian Grove, or that sort of thing. Just interestingly enough, Bohemian Grove actually has a patron saint, a Catholic patron saint. John of Nepomuk is actually the patron saint of Bohemian Grove. So there's the Catholic Church connection to Bohemian Grove as well.
Well, that's kind of something that I was going to go into next. There's Arabian tales that speak of this when studying, because I practice quite a few traditional martial arts, which are quite heavily embedded in quite a lot of history. And they speak of the Sufi Muslims. And in this, the Sufi Muslims talk of things that relate to the Sufi Muslims. They talk about, what is the word? They talk about Solomon, King Solomon. Yeah, King Solomon, who was supposed to be the wisest man. And then in this tale, which is not normally, it's not canon, but it's there. They talk about him having rings, allowing him to control jinn, which helped him to create the temple, right? So there's always this weird allure of, and I forgot the name of the two pillars. It's part of the ritual which is part of the play, the nice reinitiation, whether you want to acknowledge if it's real or not. I can't speak on that. But part of the ritual that's done by the Freemasons, which helps them to get them in tune in regards to so what I was going to ask is, do you think that there is credibility in this allure when they're saying that, if you join us and if you do manage that? Well, I know they don't say it like that, but like you get a bit of crazy people who think, right, I want to get to that 33-degree masonry. I don't care what I have to do. I want to control. I want to be able to do that. What was the guy's name? The guy from the Satanist lot who kind of had all of that kind of type of thing going on there. Do you think that there's some level of credibility to that, or it's a little bit more like 3% is the actual factor and the rest are just kind of hogwash?
I think, the lust for power, unfortunately, is human weakness. I call it the dragon sickness. Lust for wealth and power, greed. And that's rooted in our ego. And our ego is controlled by our reptilian brain. A third of our brain is called the reptilian brain. You can actually look that up. It's something that we can't even control. The reptilians control us through our ego, which is housed in our reptilian cortex. So that is it's innately in us because of the way we're made. But I think if you do the inner work, the deep spiritual journeys, you're able to break past the ego, the allure of corruption and wealth. And if you work towards being an ethical person, I think it's a lot harder to be tempted into that power play kind of dichotomy. I often find that people who crave power, normally it's to compensate for something else that's lacking in their lives. And there's a lot of people who've had lives where something was lacking, love from mommy and daddy, not enough acknowledgement in school, they didn't do well enough, because the education system is a competitive-based system. They don't teach compassion, they teach competition. And not everybody can win the race. There's a lot of kids who come second and third and last, and those kids carry that chip on their shoulder for the rest of their life, which manifests into negative ego patterns such as the lust for power and wealth. And sometimes they will do anything to get it, including corrupt acts, illegal, immoral acts. Just have to look at the fact that the arms and drugs industry are the most lucrative industries in the world. And I think the whole power dichotomy is something that I don't know. It comes with control. They need to control us to keep us subservient and playing to their agenda. So that's what I think the power thing is, because they've got all the money, they've got all the resources. Why do they need more? They'll never spend everything that they have. I've learned it's not about money. It is about power and control. And really, the at a human level, those running the show, the Kissingers of the world, Soros and Bill Gates, they're actually narcissistic psychopaths that have delusions of grandeur. They really think that they are entitled to control the world and to kill off as many people as they need to kill off in order to fulfill an agenda. I mean, a rational, sane, kind, sentient, loving person doesn't think like that. Doesn't think, I want to control the world. Let me kill 95% of everybody. It just doesn't. It's just not. It's not normal. There's something wrong with these people, and there's many reasons for why that could be. But ultimately, I think it really comes down to the insane lust, the dragon sickness for power. It's that same thing with greed, that lust for money. I grew up in a materialistic family, so I understand that drive for it, but I myself am a bit of a free spirit. I'm lucky I've deprogrammed myself from the need to, be drenched in gold and finery. I'm quite okay, with my flip-flops and bikini and being as natural as I can, because I think that's our more natural state. The less we need, the simpler our lives will be and the happier our lives will be.
Right now, quite fascinating trail of thought. I know I've spoken to some New Age people, and they kind of resonate a little bit with this trail of thought. Now, in Zimbabwe, we've got this thing that our most powerful spirit mediums, when they pass on, they then transform into lions, okay? And they spoke of things that these lions are going to be protected them. So, so when you read our literature, you tend to find like, oh yeah, when it comes to a certain point, they'll transform into lions. And that the word for the powerful spirit medium is interchangeable as well with the word lion. So depending, so Mondoro can mean lion. Mondoro could also mean great, powerful spirit medium as well. So with that being said, I remember it was quite interesting and entertaining a thought, but one I thought I'd ask anyway, because since we're focusing on dragons right now. Have you, in your research, have you come across anything that seems to lead to the train of thought that there was a different species that seemed to thrive better by genetically mutating the DNA of cats when they were on Earth, for example, and then they came from a different part of a different solar planet, and some people, it was easier for them to, manipulate DNA of reptilians. And it was quite interesting because I forgot what her name was, but she started saying like, oh yeah, you guys come from the cat hemisphere. And I'm thinking, okay. And I was thinking, is it something that you've come across as well in your research? And is there a bit of credibility to it, or is it a little bit all muddled up?
No, it's not muddled up. It's confusing because I believe that the lion is another symbol of the dragon. Also, the lion is a symbol of the sun. Okay, it's a dragon symbol. There's a dragon icon called a griffin, which has the body of a lion and the front talons of an eagle and the head of an eagle. The lion is the king of the jungle. It's the Lion King as well, is very symbolically allegorical, but also the fact that the lion actually has always been inextricably another sun symbol. Then sun symbols are actually another dragon symbol. So there's multiple layers. So you've got obviously the dragon, and then they mask the dragon in various symbolic allegories. The sun is one of those things. They use the sun symbol to mask the dragon. And then they use another symbol to mask the sun. And the sun symbol is masked by often the use of things like a lion, or there's very sunflowers. But the lion, the reason why is because it's got the corona and the hair, that comes out like the rays of a sun. That's kind of it. In fact, the word Sion and lion are etymologically cognizant with each other, and the word Sion is another word for sun. And there is a secret society called the Priory of Sion, of which Leonardo da Vinci was a Grand Master, if I'm not mistaken. And they all imbue the sun symbolism into their artworks. For example, the Last Supper is an artwork, and Jesus is another sun symbol. He's a solar deity. And they very much, that's very much depicted in the Last Supper, with the 4 seasons of the calendar, the 4 seasons of the solar year depicted by the 12 disciples, because there's 12 of them, but they're grouped into groups of 4 and 3 in each group, just like the solar year has the 12 signs of the zodiac, the 12 months, and then of course that's grouped into 4 seasons, with the sun obviously being at the center. And that's what the zodiac cross is. It's the cross of the zodiac with the circle around it. The cross point is obviously where the sun is. And then you have the 3 star signs which fit into each quarter of the cross of the zodiac. Now that's depicted in the artwork of the Last Supper. And if you've gone through my Dragonology series, I actually refer to this particular thing quite a bit. But, you know, lions, back to that point, lots of animals are used as symbolic allegories of dragons, not just lion. You've got, for example, the fish, the serpent, the bird, and what's the other one that's quite common? The cockerel, for example. The basilisk is sometimes depicted with the head of a cockerel, like a hen, a male hen, and the tail of a lizard. There's one of the things you'll find that emerges from mythology is that there are these sort of hybrid figures that sort of come out constantly, these hybrid chimera, a half this, a half that, merged into one. The merged animal figures sometimes have lion body parts, and the lion again is a symbol of being the sun, the king of the jungle, the strength of the lion. All of that are attributes that are very common and familiar with the dragon. So the dragon and the lion, again, inextricably linked through the sun symbol allegory.
That is amazing. I remember we touched on something about L. What do you think the body of work, obviously, like, there's all that body of work that came from the Dead Sea Scrolls, and obviously there were 1,000 when they picked 66 and they streamed this book together because it was the easiest way to flow. But then you got stuff in the book of Enoch that seems to trace a lot of reference to giants and large reptiles and things of this magnitude. You know, the imagination spectrum just kind of shoots off the page in the book of Enoch and what he speaks of in there. What is your thoughts on that? Is that like a slightly more closer account? Would you say that would be something that would be less diluted, do you think?
Well, I don't know how diluted it would be. I couldn't say it in degrees of dilution. What I could say is that what people often consider imagination and mythology, they need to have a little look closer, because one of the things I hate about the word myth or legend is that it kind of means, kind of like I hate the term conspiracy theorist, because it means that it's semi-dismissive. Okay.
Yep.
Same with mythology. Oh, it's mythological. Oh, it's semi-dismissive. It's almost fictional. When actually, I think nothing can be further from the truth, because what I have discovered in my anthropological research is that it's the things that people find important which find place in their mythology. Okay, the things they pass down through oral traditions or through paintings or symbol or carvings or sculptures. Those are the things they want the generations of the future to know were of importance to the people of the past. So that's why they get put in there. And for this reason, I think that myths deserve a little bit more serious attention. And rather than just to be, you know, relegated to the realms of being semi-dismissive, we really need to look at these things, because although some things might not immediately be obvious to us because they seem, oh, that's a bit fantastical, you know, a flying serpent, really? Actually, it could be a great deal of truth to it if you just understand what it is they're talking about. You know, when they talk about, for example, in Greek mythology, they talk about the sirens or they talk about the harpies. Really, it's just the female countenance of the dragon, various ways in which these dragons were interpreted in the artistic sense, you know, be it whether they were painted onto pottery or whether they were interpreted that way through literature. Because, of course, another dragon entity that comes up in Greek mythology is the Gorgon Medusa. And of course, Gorgon Medusa had the serpent hair, didn't she? So she was one with her serpent self, because the hair was part of her body. So that's interesting, because the word Gorgon, again, has the dragon root word gon, and a dragon, Gorgon. And then the OR of Gorg is actually dragon root word, or is a dragon root word. And you find it turning up in some very interesting places that pertain to serpentine etymology. But you can't underestimate the importance of these symbolic allegories that turn up in various mythologies. And what you find is when you are able to start interpreting them for what they are and being able to draw them back to the dragon roots, because that's all symbolism, really what it does is it masks the appearance of the dragon. That's what all symbolism is about. Even the words we speak are symbols that mask the dragon. As I've proven through my dragonology body of work with all the dragon root words. So you need to understand that whatever sort of mythology you're looking at, you've got to pick out the things like there are definite themes which reoccur from one mythology to the next. And the reoccurring themes, the repetition of certain lexicons, symbolic traits, and iconography, what it does is it shows that there's an absolute truth to the existence of these dragons that control us. And they have always been here. They still very much control this reality because we use their language, which is their source code. You know, it's the source code to our internal matrix is the language. We think in language. We don't really, at least I do. And that's, you know, it's, again, back to the mythology aspect of it. Look, when you're looking at all of these different symbolic characters or these metamorphized characters, chimera or whatever it might be, you have to understand first off that they're showing the ability of a being to shapeshift from one form to another, because when you've got like two different animals merged, an anthropomorphized animal, maybe half, you sometimes see pictures of these serpentine beings being half human with a snake lower part, like the Naga, which is Southeast Asia and India. And when you start to notice that there's definite key symbolic things which link all of these beings together, these beings of superior powers, you start to notice the themes are all the same. They've all got abilities that we don't have. For example, to appear or disappear, appear from nowhere and disappear into thin air, to perhaps to shapeshift, to fly. They can breathe underwater. They seem to be immune to fire. They're very inextricably associated with fire. Think of the fire dragons. They seem to be able to manipulate water in ways that we can't. They seem to have abilities to create amazing structures that are beyond human comprehension. I just think of things like the amazing buildings in South America with these huge stones, Sesuaman and all of that. So and again, on Sesuaman, on the stones, you've got lots of little serpents carved into the stones as relief carvings. All like an artist signs their work. So these guys signed their work with their calling card, which is serpent symbolism, which again is always allegorical of the dragon.
Wow, that's absolutely fascinating. Cool. I think I got a couple more questions, but for meanwhile, we'll go for a break and give people a chance to digest the many bits of information. Also get to go through some of the questions that people were asking on the Facebook Live. I dropped I think I put an update in regards to the people that asked the author that you had mentioned before, and I kind of dropped the name in there for our viewers. So yeah, we should be back, we'll say about 15 minutes.
Welcome back. Welcome back, guys, to Mwenem Tapa Restoration. We are in a very important interview with Melanie Vermeer, an alternative journalist, researcher of African spirituality, mysteries, myths, and not only just, Africa, but a lot of the anomalies that have been happening around the world. She's a great researcher. She has written so many books, but with the popular book that is pertinent to Mwenem Tapa Restoration being the South African Guide to the Global Conspiracy, making reference to Illuminati frontman Cecil John Rhodes that we know of. She spoke a lot about it in our last interview, but particularly today we have interviewer Lionel Mashinge, who is part of the Mwenem Tapa Restoration Board of Members, asking Melanie about on the subject of exploring Southern African spirituality, mysteries, and myths. So This is the second phase of the interview. In the first phase, we've been covering a lot of, the symbolisms of the dragonology, serpents, and all the mythical creatures that have been identified in our culture around the world, with the Japanese and the dragons in different forms, but they're all alluding to the serpent cult. So we talked a little bit about that, and feel free to go back and watch that the first phase of that interview. This is now the final phase of the interview. So what we're going to do is that as you're watching, if you do feel propelled, to ask a question, you have something that's in your head that you really want, or seeking questions, here is a qualified person within this field who can attempt to assess, and assist us, at the same time, and to bring more clarity into your question. So feel free to just plug in your question as we're flowing with the interview. Lionel and myself will be monitoring to see, what you guys are thinking about this. And after that, we're just going to, just free flow with the interview and conclude. So I just have a question, and this is a very interesting question because this is literally the drive behind Mwene Mtapa restoration. So, and it's also going to be good information for you, Melanie, since you may not have a clear understanding of what Mwene Mtapa restoration is. So we are reviving the empire of Mwene Mtapa, which was the greatest empire in sub-Saharan Africa ever recorded. They got their smarts from, from their ancestors, who probably had their own smarts, from ancient Egypt, and you've been alluding to great stuff like Atlantis. I thought Atlantis was maybe in the Middle East or somewhere, but I had no clue that Atlantis was actually recorded, and there's evidence that it's there in, you said Morocco?
No, Mauritania.
Oh, Mauritania.
Yes. It's
So
now known as the Ricard structure, or the Eye of the Sahara, and you can see how it could very much have been Atlantis. We can go there if you want to for a little bit.
Awesome. So this empire of Mwene Mtapa was well structured. It had zero to do with Freemasonry of the Vatican and the Jesuits. It was an ethical empire that operated on the values and the philosophy of Ubuntu, which I always talk about, which has to do about ethics, compassion, lack of ego. If I can't do, if we all can't do it, I can't do it either. I am, because we are collective people. So this, it got either interfered by colonization that we all know about, but still these colonies coming from Europe came to the realization that they do not want to be subservient to the to the motherlands in Europe, which in this case is Britain. So they attempted to really gain their own independence, and struggled until this sort of manipulation finally succumbed and took hold of Africa in the form of liberation struggles, which was very, very uniform. It happened in almost every country: Zimbabwe, South Africa, Botswana. I mean, Ghana was the first to be independent, and it trickled like an effect. And they introduced these bureaucracies and governance systems that were established by the colonies, and emanating from the Vatican and the Queen of England. And now we have Africa, and we have almost all African leaders, as Milani has been alluding to, that most of the African leadership is subservient. Most of them are Freemasons, and probably the rest of most parts of the world, with just only a few. So my question is the detachment process, the exiting of Africa. We can start from Southern Africa, the exiting process from this hold, this manipulation, this continuous suffering and struggling of the people of Southern Africa, in South Africa, the slums in Soweto, the slums that are all over in Zimbabwe, the unemployment, the manipulation of the economies, sanctions.
Yes, it's a good question. That is the most important question. Yeah, I think we should all be asking that question right now. How do we exit all of the corruption? Okay, there are answers, and they're not easy. So let me start with what I can from my own experience. I served as the international media advisor to the Royal House of the Khoisan Nation, specifically to a gentleman calling himself Kubaha, which is a word which means hereditary tribal leader in Khoisan, Kubaha, Calvin Cornelius III. He took his documentation to the United Nations to inform them that he had the intention of seceding the Cape Province from the Republic of South Africa through a process known as secession. Now, the secession documentation was drawn up by a gentleman called Winston P. Nagin, who was the Professor Emeritus of Law at Florida University. And he himself was of Khoisan descent, but he's been teaching at Florida University for like the last 10 years. And he basically has been involved in a number of countries that have declared independence. That's one of his expertise fields. So he put together the documentation, and it points to the fact that there is actually a United Nations Declaration on Human Rights with regards to what we consider the right of First Nations to secede their territory. Now, secession means the removal of territory from another authority, that on the basis of first of being the original claimants of the land, or having a specific cultural identity that they wish to preserve outside. And this is actually facilitated by the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. And there's a number of International Labour Office law documentation, which also specifically puts into law, international law, that a culture, people who have been there since, like for example, the Khoisan, when the Dutch East India Company arrived at South Africa in 1652, it's documented in their journals. The first people that came across were these caramel skin colored Khoisan, Hottentot Bushmen, whatever you want to call them, that were, there. And the Cape and most of the Kalahari, bits of Namibia, even into Zimbabwe, was originally part of their territory. And what they want to do is they want to secede it from the corrupt Republic of South Africa government, and get everything to do with the Republic of South Africa. So get the government officials out there and put their own parliament in, particularly just for the Cape. Now that of course excludes KwaZulu-Natal, Transvaal, Orange Free State, or what we call now Mpumalanga, and there's much other things going on there. I'm just using this as an example. And it can be done because the legal precedent exists. It's law. And there are people presently trying to do such a thing, which is a restoration of their culture. But here's the beautiful thing about the Khoisan. They're also known as the Cape Coloured. They are also being oppressed by the corrupt governments that we have there. And it's not a colour thing, it's a rich and poor thing. These very wealthy people are making a lot of money taking bribes to give contracts for arms and weapons and all sorts of things like that. So, there's all that kind of dirtiness going on, the usual story. But the Khoisan, what they want is to get rid of these people. And they're not like some of the extreme black government rhetoric where they're going to kill the Boer, kill the Afrikaner, kill the white man, kind of also what they were trying to do in Zimbabwe a little bit, killing some of the farmers there. That's not what the Khoisan are about. They say anybody who lives in the Cape could stay in the Cape. If you're born here, you have the right to be here. It doesn't matter what skin color you are. We just want the corruption out. We want the Freemason, dark satanic Illuminati, pay all our taxpayer money to the World Bank, controlling oligarchs to get the hell out. That's what they want. And what the thing is, ultimately, I think we're all wanting the same thing. Here's what we do. We need to unite on our common ground. Irrespective of our race, it's really about the cause now. Because the one thing this COVID-19 thing has done is really awakened people to, I think, that there is a centrally controlling government which gives the narrative to the leaders. The leaders of countries, they're just puppets in a puppet show. They have no real power. Behind them, there are people pulling the strings, telling them what to say, what to do. And that was never more obvious for me than when you looked at the pledging ceremony or the pledging event they had when you had all these famous actors and musicians coming together for the stay-at-home concert to get countries to pledge. And they raised $8 billion for COVID-19 vaccine research. And they had the leaders of every single country, including Cyril Ramaphosa, South Africa's president, all saying the same thing. They're all saying we need to raise money for vaccines, diagnostics, and education. And it was like the same three things, the same three words in the same order said by every world leader, every leader of every country. That's because these people have been given the script by a higher power and told what to say to the media. They couldn't just all have accidentally said the same thing in the same order. This for me has been a big wake-up call for humanity. And what we now need to do, and why my husband and I, Biggie, we're really honored that you boys take such an interest in this information. And we were just saying to each other privately, what a great opportunity for us to all collaborate, because there are so many people who are asking that very important question. That question you're asking, which is how do we get rid of these people? Because they don't have our best interests at heart. They just don't, just trying to convince this COVID-19, oh no, for your safety, you got to stay at home, you got to wear masks, you got to do all this and that and the next thing. I'm sorry, if they really cared about our safety, they'd take better care of things like heart disease, they take better care of things like suicide. I always say, instead of, we've got a situation where we've got 500,000 deaths today, just under 500,000 deaths today due to supposed COVID-19, but we've got 2 million deaths due to cigarette smoking, 1 million deaths due to alcohol, and there's over 6 million deaths due to communicable diseases that are not COVID-19. So there's other things. And what about hunger? Hunger is something that we could absolutely solve. All we had to do is take the money spent on military, and you would house, feed, clothe, educate, medically care for every single person on this planet, no one left behind. Redirect the military spending. Defense, what are you defending from? No, these people it's war games for them, all these expensive toys. Just, for example, one aircraft carrier, on a ship, the amount of money those things cost, you could feed an African country for like 10 years with some of the, what one of those things cost. Do we really need all these weapons, all these nuclear arsenal? I think the money can be better spent feeding children, because that for me is the epidemic. That's where we need to be redirecting all this money. So it's a case of we need to get rid of this industrial military complex that's sucking all the resources out of society for war games. Not being funny, but it can only be done if we all unite on our common ground. And it's lovely, like I said, again, there's groups like you who are coming together, the Khoisan under the Greater Aboriginal Community Council of South Africa are once again trying for secession because they realize the situation in South Africa is very dire. And there are other groups. There's what's it, Chaz in America. I think it's a city called Chaz that's so suddenly become self-governing, and it's become a new country within the United States. Now, I'm not per se suggesting anarchy or anything as radical as that, but because I just I wouldn't have the strategy. I don't have the know-how to say this is how we've got to do it. What I know is I know what's got to be done. It's the necessary steps on the way. And here's the thing is, unfortunately, if we want to get to that point, there is going to be loss of life, there is going to be violence, there is going to be bloodshed. There are going to be people who are going to have to put their necks on the line. And who's that going to be, and how will we deal with the fallout of that? All these things have to be taken into account. But yes, a restoration of true values and ethics. And I do believe that there was a time, absolutely, in our past where we lived a better way. I don't think it was always like this for us, for everybody, even if it wasn't this iteration of our species. We've got an innate goodness in us, a desire, a creative capacity beyond any other species on this planet. And there's so much we can do to create that world. I've worked with so many great leaders over the years, and one of the best that I've ever come across in terms of offering a social structure that I thought was holistic and sustainable long-term was that offered by the Venus Project, which talks about a resource-based economy where all of Earth's resources are the common heritage of all of humanity, not just the exclusive intellectual property of a ruling elite. Now, Jacques Fresco was over 100 years old. I think he was 101 when he died. I had the great opportunity of interviewing him twice. And he truly is one of the greatest minds I've ever come across. And his resource-based economy model for me was the only way I've ever come across that I have played the scenario out forward in my head. And I can honestly say that it is probably the only way we will ever get around the long-term hunger and the eradication of war. And it also is about getting rid of the debt slavery system, the monetary system as we understand it, rather work from a resource-based economy system, not a debt-based monetary system. You need to unmute. There we go.
All right. Wow. Really, really, really powerful. That is really powerful and unifying, and it's down to earth, and it is applicable, and it's compatible. Would you be interested in bridging us with the Khoisan initiatives that you have just mentioned? I've heard about the Chaz, and trust me, in my line of work, they're almost like an enemy right now because it's anarchy, and anarchy is just not the answer. As you said already. But would you be interested in unifying us with the Khoisan in our quest for Mwenem Tapa restoration?
Absolutely. I'll furnish you with all the documents, and you seem smart enough to be able to look through them. But really, what you need to be doing is having people who are willing to claim. I mean, you guys are all over the world. That's the thing. Is just the same as me. My white South Africans, most of us have had to leave because, first off, there's no jobs for us anymore, and it's not safe for us there anymore. And, we get blamed for everything. And, I'm not saying that we're not responsible for a certain amount, but I'm certainly not. I mean, my family have suffered at the hands of the corruption that has always been present. My grandfather was killed in the Colesberg mining disaster of 1960, of the mines owned by, Cecil John Rhodes and the Oppenheimers and all of those. So I've suffered too, man. But I would also love to have my home country restored to a place that I think is a more nourishing environment, less crime, less fear, less hatred, more collaboration, more abundance, and just a generally better quality of life than to live in fear and constant anxiety with all the shit that's going on. The Khoisan, really, that's what they want. They just want to get on with it. They know that we don't need anything from the international powers that be, which is why initially when they filled out the paperwork and the king delivered it to the United Nations in New York, he didn't go there to ask their permission. Oh, please, can we secede from South Africa? He went there to go, we are seceding, we are claiming our freedom, and we are putting you on notice of this fact. We don't need your permission. And that is really the attitude you've got to go in with, because freedom is your innate human right. No one can give it to you and no one can take it from you. However, it's not a guaranteed thing. You have to claim it. There's no way you can take your freedom for granted anymore. Not in the way these people are taking it away so quickly, stripping us of our civil liberties. You have to claim your freedom. And there may be legal instruments that you need to invoke in order to do that. So things like this Declaration of Human Rights, that's part of the United Nations law, can be used to create a situation where you secede a territory that's occupied by people who have a cultural identity with the land, with each other, and wish to remain as such, independent and self-determining. Or they have an established legitimate claim to the land as First Nations. Okay, and I write a lot about this. I write a lot about the right of First Nations to their land. And you know, the last thing about the First Nations is they don't even want that much. They just want enough that their culture can thrive. And really, the Khoisan are very much the same. They're not saying, you know, we want to take over the Cape and it will then, you know, turn into the Sahara Desert like all the rest of our territories. They want to maintain the infrastructure the way it is. And they're not looking to de-evolve our society. What they want is to remove the toxic elements from it by seceding the territory, getting the people out of parliament who are controlling everything in Cape Town. And they don't want to have bloodshed. They don't want to have to invoke any kind of armed forces or weapons in order to go through this process. They want to be able to do it by faith and by honor. Now, documentation was delivered to Parliament by King Cornelius, and it was just ignored. They were told that they couldn't run an election in the Cape because the Cape didn't belong to them. It belonged to the Khoisan. It was renamed the Sovereign State of Good Hope. They even had a ceremony. This King Kuba, he had a ceremony outside and in fact, our network was the only people to stream the ceremony live, a secession ceremony outside the Castle of Good Hope in Cape Town. And yeah, they signed the declarations there, symbolically stating we now secede this territory on the 24th of September 2017 from the Republic of South Africa, and we rename it the Sovereign State of Good Hope. It's now been shortened to Good Hope Country by the Greater Aboriginal Community Council, who have taken over this initiative from King Cornelius, who really, you know, because you know, he didn't have much experience with diplomacy. He, in the end, actually ended up electing a whole bunch of people around him that were just using him to get somewhere because they thought this was a ride for them. And he fell out with everybody. He's isolated himself. But all the tribal leaders of the Khoisan have pulled together and are now taking this step to go the next route, the next step of this process, because they've had enough. Their people are being treated as badly as the white people in South Africa. Now, the Khoisan are, again, just another genetically distinct group. They're not very dark-skinned. The Cape colors, I don't know if you know what they kind of have a more caramel color and slightly different features to, for example, the Zulus and the Shaunas. And they're a distinct, you know, genetic group. They've been on this pieces of land for maybe 100,000 years. And to me, listening to some of their legends, okay, I've been fortunate to, again, pick up this information about the Serpent Created God, even within these tribes in Southern Africa, they talk about this. And of course, they've got that serpent effigy in stone, 70,000-year-olds in Sedilo Hill. And so all these legends and things tie into each other and tie into these people. And the fact that they've got these legends proves that, you know, they've been there since the very beginning. They were there before Christianity and colonization, and they have the right to that land. So they have gone about the process of secession based on the fact that they are the legitimate First Nations. And so far, they've not had very much success in getting the government out of Cape Town, because of course, Cape Town is such a lucrative part of South Africa. It's the hub of the tourist trade. It's one of the most beautiful parts of South Africa. So the Cape is not something that the Republic of South Africa will want to let go. But they have a similar thing here in Catalonia, where the Catalan people wanted to secede the area, which includes Barcelona, the fourth most densely populated region in the whole of Europe. They want to secede that from Spain. You've got another thing going on here with what you call the Basque people. The Basque region sits half on Spanish territory, half on French territory, but they're a distinct cultural group with a language that's not from the Latin origin. I mean, they're an old, distinct cultural group. They have been trying to separate their land from the EU. And I mean, they've even got a terrorist group called ETA, which are referred to as the Basque separatists, because they want to separate from, and they've bombed and done all sorts of things in Spain and France, because obviously they, you know, think that's the way to go about doing things, is bombing and destroying. That's, in my opinion, not the way to go about doing things. I think violence is never the answer. We can always find a better solution. So there are many initiatives like what you're suggesting with your restoration project. And ultimately, I always say this to people, the true beauty about humanity, no matter our colors differences, no matter our cultural differences, no matter our language differences, no matter the differences in our preferences and our social habits, the true beauty is ultimately we all want the same thing. And that is the common ground on which we need to unite in pursuit of a free, fair, just, peaceful, sustainable, non-toxic world. And it's that simple.
Thank you. Wow. Wow. That's a lot of take home right there. It's definitely feasible. And it sounds like if the Khoisan have already started initiatives, then I feel that it's more than a Mwenemtapa restoration. It's probably greater, a restoration of something greater than that, which is where Mwenemtapa restoration might be a microcosm of, you know, what is to come. So I feel very motivated to take on this initiative and continue to liaise, because in our power, just, you know, as you mentioned, we're all thinking about the same thing. You know, we all want freedom and liberty. This life sucks, and everything about it, everybody knows. Like, you ask the police officer, you really sit down with the soldier that's deployed. You sit down with the business moguls and all these corporations, the regular teacher, the carpenter. You really sit down with these folks, and they really don't like, you know, the life and the way it's designed, and just something is not adding up right about it, especially with the COVID-19. So a lot of manipulation. We don't want this stuff anymore. Politics out the drain. Doesn't make sense. Politics has never, it doesn't make sense. It's never really benefited the continent. It's caused further divide, genocides, tribalism, racism, and so many of these things that are, byproducts of a very sinister system. So I'm not buying it in terms of Zimbabwe. I don't think that politics is going to be the answer. The style that they want is not going to be feasible for a restoration. And just as you mentioned, that violence is never the answer to solving situations. I have, we all know, especially, Zimbabweans and in our culture, that resorting to taking on war is the last option. Our ancestors, our greater ancestors, Chaminuka and they are not for war at all, and they believe that there's other alternatives to solving disputes and rehabilitation and healing for our people. We have in Winning Tupper history, we have an agenda which has 7 objectives, and most of these objectives, I think, are in line with the Khoisan initiatives, because I think they want to take things back to grassroots level and reinstate their ancient royalties and empires, where they receive their inspiration not from Freemasons, but from their higher spiritual and positive forces. I do want to point out that if it could be possible, if this could be conveyed, that we I would like to think that we have to sit down with the Khoisan elders in regards to trying to fix the history and our interaction with our, of our ancestors with theirs. I believe there's been some atrocities becoming as a result of our settling into, the Bantu settling into Southern Africa, the driving out, the sudden driving out of the Khoisan from all these rocky areas in Zimbabwe, where there's evidence of them residing in these areas. And we would like to sit down on a really spiritual level, compensate, and try to bring some cohesion between us and them. We're really working on the Ndebele, with the Ndebele people, as a result of Mufekane with the Chaka Zulu sort of warfare that was going on back in the days. So we're really trying to heal, to unify, and to get Southern Africa back on track with our ancient institutions that we need right now, especially this time and place. I'll throw it back to Lina.
Yeah, thanks, guys. That's always amazing and powerful input. Couple of things did ping in my head there, as naturally curious person. Some questions will ping, but as we spoke about this before, just to make it full for clarity and just for transparency reasons, we are concerned. Like, obviously, I'm the interviewer, and I've seen some of the viewers have asked questions. I've kind of pinged some of you before, but I'm just going to give you an opportunity, obviously, just as you relayed to me what your thoughts are for transparency purposes. Ruben Cohen, that's not his real name, but I'll play along. I know who he is. He asked a question, and his question was, is it not possible that our genetic defect may be as a result of an historical genetic bottleneck as seen in biological research across almost all studied species around 4,500 to 6,000 years ago? That was for yourself there, Mel. Yeah.
It's a difficult one for me to answer. I haven't done enough research into that to say one way or the other whether I agree or disagree with that statement.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it's one of those difficult ones that in the medical journal field, it's a little bit tricky, and they sometimes do this, and I think it's a little bit naughty in science. If they find material or DNA that we have no understanding or accountability for, they say, oh, why do you have that? That's just waste, and there's a possibility that we are not aware of what that thing is, because I personally study Chinese martial arts, and as Ruben knows, in Chinese martial arts, we study forms of medicine that's over 5,000 years old in the forms of Qigong. So they talk about things that are in there that cannot, modern Western medicine right now cannot measure. Doesn't mean it's wrong or it's not. It becomes difficult. So I think they may do that from a scholarly perspective, but I think it's such a tricky thing to answer, even for a medical person in the field, because because they speak about the appendix, what's the purpose of the appendix? You know, they argue about things like this because all it does is collect waste. At some point it bursts, and then it's kind of like it's useless. Well, what's it there for? So it's one of those tricky things. But yeah, I think he was just flexing his medical muscles there. I think I see you. And he had another question for you, Mel.
Yeah.
And he asked, I think he maybe was talking about the megalithic structures in this part. So he goes like, could these structures and ancient scientists be possibly linked to the Nephilim, perhaps described differently all over the world? Dragons, etc., being that some believe that they were descent of the Watchers, as mentioned in the Book of Enoch. Great topic and knowledge, guys.
Good question. Yes, the Watchers, the Nephilim, the Elohim are the archons, are the dragons, are the angels, are the demons, are the Nagas, are all these things, the Lord of Hosts, the gods, the deities, the divas, the devils. There's a million different names and titles for them. It's ultimately the same thing. These serpentine reptilian beings with advanced abilities. They can appear, disappear, shapeshift. Apparently had technology to genetically create us as a species, our version of Homo sapien that we are living through now. And the Watchers is interesting because the symbol of the all-seeing eye is the symbol of the Watcher, the eternal Watcher. And they were the Watchers. That's the Nephilim is just another word for the same thing we have been talking about. They have a lot of different titles. But it's, again, you can't ignore the evidence of this because the term Nephilim turns up in the Bible. How many sources of this information do we have to see before we start believing it? It's in our holy books, you know. And you mentioned a little while ago, Solomon with his rings, able to control the jinn. The jinn, the genies, are the dragons. They are the same thing. And again, if you go through my dragonology body of work, I prove this. It's in the etymology. They are exactly the same thing. That's where you get the word genius from, where you get the word genetics, generation, origin, all from this root of the jinn. And jinn is just the Arab or Islamic classification for a dragon. And you often see images, Islamic art, of these creatures depicted with serpents wrapped around their arms or falling down their necks. It's very common. What was the other part of that question you were asking? Or they have answered that?
I think you've hit all of the things I was asking. He was basically, like you said, in cross-reference to other cultures. Is it just possibly they use different names for the same thing?
Yeah. It's all, again, it's like these creatures are depicted in different styles depending on which sort of culture you find yourself in. I mean, the Egyptian artwork and hieroglyphics have a very distinct style compared to, say, Mesoamerica. But ultimately, there's serpents in both sets of artworks, always very prominently featured in their temples, on their paintings, etc.
I got a question that just sprang out right now, and you might be aware, or Biggie might also be aware. It's almost when you talk about mysteries and folklore and myths, it's almost as if it only relates to indigenous people, and now it's like fairy tale to the West. You know, Europeans and you know, Americans. You talk about mermaids, people start laughing. What the hell are you talking about? You want to talk about brazen heads, like oracles. They'll be like, yo. You want to talk about goblins, but all these are all English names, and the element of truth is they're known mermaids. There's a word for that, half fish, half human. Goblins, brazen heads. But then all of a sudden, this has come non-existent in European culture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Sorry to interject. In Europe, in England, they're still very much alive because they still do the Morris dancing. Paganism is very much on the rise, so a lot of people are still, that form of spirituality is coming back in London.
Never went away. it never went away. It's always been there. The Druidic traditions have always been there. They've just become more popular as this information. People move away from secular, religion to more traditional. People realize the church is just corrupt. It's a money-making organ, doesn't pay taxes, and basically funds most of the wars. But what you do find with these traditions in places like England and all over the world with regards to the dragons is that they are again encoded into things like Morgan Le Fay, the traditions of Arthur. You find these symbols turning up in the mythologies there. But you were talking about indigenous people. Your question was what was it with relation to indigenous people?
Yeah, I was just trying to say that in most indigenous native circles in Africa, Aborigines, it's people make contact or still making contact and believe in the mysteries. They're not more myths, but they're actual occurrences.
That's it. Sorry, I now know what I was going to add to that. There's a word that they have used to kind of, again, get us to believe that these tales are semi-dismissive. It's something called a fairy tale, okay? It's a fairy tale, or it's a myth, or it's a legend. And when automatically that label gets put onto something, okay, we move it from historical fact to semi-dismissive fiction. And that is done purposely because what they want is for us to ignore all this stuff so that we don't go there. When you go there and you start to explore what all this stuff really is, you learn what the true nature of our reality is. And they don't want that. They want you to be ignorant of the truth so that they can control us by feeding us what their version of the truth, what they want us to know so that we follow their paradigm.
Right. I'm sorry I'm going to do this to you, Mel. I have to ask you this. Going off the reservation a bit. Is the world flat?
Go on. Oh, here we go. Here is my answer. You're going to love this. I have not seen enough evidence one way or the other to tell me whether the earth is flat or round. Here is what I have seen with my own eyes. I have never seen the curvature of the earth. I have flown all over the world, and I love to sit by the window seat. I've never seen the curvature of the earth. That's the honest truth. I have real questions about, does the earth actually spin? Because when you get in a plane, the plane always has to move. But if the earth is spinning, surely the plane just has to lift up, wait for whatever country they're trying to get to arrive because it's spinning, and then put the plane back down. So I have a lot of questions about, the physics of our world and how things really are, considering how much they bullshit and lied to us. I just, I would never dismiss flat Earth completely. It's just, I think there's a real tangible evidence to suggest that there's something to the whole flat Earth story. But I'm also one who works by what I can decipher with my five senses and what makes sense to me. And what I will categorically say is I've never seen the curvature of the earth, and I just don't think a lot of the science makes any sense. For example, and I'll give you one of the things that you cannot do. You cannot catch a flight straight from, and if you guys can find this, please let me know. You cannot catch a flight straight from, say, South America, Argentina to Australia. You've always got to go via somewhere else. And you would think it's a straight shot across the Pacific, maybe a few hours, but you can't. I mean, the flights on average are 9 to 15 hours, and there's normally a lay-by somewhere. They always seem to have to go north first. Now, if you look at the flat earth structure, in order to get from somewhere like Argentina to Australia, you do have to fly north. Whereas the globe structure, it looks like you should just be able to get there across the Pacific for a few hours. But it's not really like that, you see. I think the layout is, they've lied to us so much that they may even have lied to us about what lands exist and what lands don't. We only have certain lands on the map. Okay, but I bet you there are places in the world that they keep secret from us. There may even be whole islands that they block out from Google Earth and maps that are, you don't not supposed to know are there. So there's a lot that's been kept from us. I mean, they've probably kept from us that there are extraterrestrial races living on Earth, living in the inner side of the Earth, or even operating in ships that are just beyond visible sight within our solar system. We can't see them with the naked eye, maybe a telescope or two. But they've kept all that from us. So, I mean, the shape of the Earth, I don't see why they wouldn't keep that from us if they were lying to us about it. But I know this is very divisive, because it's one of those things like, oh, you're a flat earther, oh, you're a conspiracy theorist. It's kind of got that dogma attached to it that if you believe in that stuff, people don't pay attention to you anymore because you're automatically dismissed as a wacko. So I go with my journalistic stance that I need to see evidence, and what I've seen with my own eyes is not enough evidence to convince me that the Earth is either flat or either round. However, I don't dismiss the potential for either.
Thank you for that. The core reason that I asked you this is something that I was looking at in the Zimbabwe epic, and I was meant to ask you because you did a brief mention about hollow Earth theories. So I don't know how great the imagery is. If you can just let me use this one instead. I don't know. Can you see that pretty well?
Yeah, reasonably. Yeah.
Reasonably, right? So obviously you can see that's on surface level huts, but underneath it, like an underground structure, there's like a cave going in there, right? And this was quite a common feature, which it seems that it was a little bit strange that they did this, and considering the type of tools that they had, but it wasn't. And like you also mentioned before about the desire to get gold from the underground, and these images, I think Stan's got the same book. His lighting might be a little bit better than mine. You got the book at hand?
What page is that?
Right. So you can start from about page 49. And then they're showing like the pictures of the gold in that. Page 59, you can see there's underground structures going into the ground. Page 60 is the particular one with that image. And it's almost like there was a labyrinth of these underground layers that existed.
This one you're talking about?
Yeah, that's the one.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so now this is a common thing because, you've got this in Australia as well. You've got these beautiful old Victorian buildings, and they found out actually these buildings underneath it. You got this in Russia. It seems like there's also this whole mud. We've had a big mudslide that's covered the earth at some stage, and blah, 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 and a whole bunch of civilizations got wiped out. But the cataclysms, let me just tell you something. Off this coast of mine here, where we live, we have the what we call the Pan-Atlantic Ridge, which is a ridge of volcanoes that runs down the entire coastline of Europe and Africa, on the west coast of Africa. And if one of those volcanoes goes off, it can set off a chain reaction which activates every volcano in that ridge, which will send a tsunami across the Atlantic that would destroy the east coast of North America, all of South America, as well as the west coast of Africa. Oh yeah, and I see they've got caves and.
So you can see like there's a man standing up on top, like I think he looks like possibly dressed like an Arab. He's got a gun, and you can kind of see they're kind of siphoning through whatever they're finding from the underground, and it gives such an elaborate picture of how they are completely underground, and you can see the huts on the normal base level.
Yeah, it's just like the photo you showed me. That is so interesting. Oh my God, yeah, I'd love to spend more time looking into this kind of stuff in Africa. I'm already finding on your restoration page on Facebook some wonderful articles. I found a lovely website, Oh Africa, and it's got some great, for me, as and what I call crypto-anthropologist with an absolute passion for Africa. It is just a wonderful resource to be able to pick up on some of those articles you guys are posting on that page, because it's such immense interest to me. This is what is really interesting is to see, how, and I keep going back to this, mainstream historians have been so dismissive about Africa's importance. And even this, I would love to go somehow get a group of people, raise the funding to go and look for the lost city of the Kalahari. That it's what they've based the Sun City, Lost City on, is that there is this legendary lost city somewhere within sort of that part of Southern Africa, and I'd love to go find it. I really would. And it's apparently massive. Some of the walls are said to be as big as the Great Wall of China, and look like what the Great Wall of China would look like after an earthquake partly crumbled. And of course, the sands in the Kalahari obviously cover some of it. But for me, I'm continuously searching for evidence of advanced civilizations in Africa through Google Earth, through my contacts, through the research, through various archives and maps and things that I get gifted with by other researchers in the area who know this is my area of expertise. In fact, what we should do is I'd like to sit down with you boys and do the presentation of Atlantis in Africa with you. And we do it as a recording on a share screen, because I need to use a share screen to actually show you the images, because the evidence is overwhelming. It will blow you away when you actually look at how Africa was the center of the world. Even on the map, Africa is in between the east and the west, right? It is the center of the world. And how can it have been the center of the world? And it's still depicted as the center of the world. And it had just been this place where, historians go, barbarians fighting each other, nothing there, just a bit picturesque parts of the world. I don't understand how they can justify that in their academic circles, because that is so not true. And here's the thing, is because I love adventure. I love discovering things. And there's so much to be discovered there. So much to be discovered. I would just adore to properly go do a proper expedition with the film crew and go around to some of these megalithic structures and sites, even in Ethiopia, some of those rock-cut churches that were basically insanely beautiful rock-cut churches that were supposedly carved by angels, apparently. I mean, again, technology from the dragons is most likely what we're looking at here. So, and some of the biggest obelisks in the world are in Ethiopia. And the Ethiopian culture itself being, so far, it was actually the Atlantis culture, because it's spread all the way south. And there's so much evidence to suggest that Africa, even the Congo, what is now the Virgin Forest, was a thriving agricultural hub. And I think the whole of Africa at one stage was just connected, different kingdoms of resources and trade. And I found a lovely piece on your group Facebook page about King Musa, the wealthiest person to have ever lived. And he was the king of Mali, I think it was, in the 14th century. Still to this day the wealthiest man that ever lived. 400 billion in personal fortune from salt and gold trade. Now, for me, I find that fascinating. Do you think any person knows about King Musa in African history? Forget about it. The wealthiest man of all time, and you never learn about him. You never hear about him. Didn't even know he existed. So this is it, is that, yes, the restoration, great idea. We also need a restoration of knowledge. I've always said I keep telling my Khoisan counterparts who I'm advising, that when they finally secede the Cape and they take it over and they start restoring the educational systems, I want to come back, I want a university post, and I want to teach real African history. And what's great is when you're working with the university, you've got students who are researching with you at the same time. So it's a collective, collaborative effort to restore the truth of the greatness of Africa's history to its legitimate place in the minds of the people who come behind us.
Awesome. And as you were explaining regarding putting together our history on a almost global scale, at the University of Oregon here in Eugene, western part of the United States, west side, I went, there's a museum of natural history and culture. I just, because I'm always inquisitive, and I went there and I identified that there was some really, really great historical stuff in there. The oldest shoes that were ever found, I think they're like 10,000 years old. I saw them. But what was interesting was that the indigenous people of Oregon, I think it goes way back to 80,000 or 70,000 years ago. They did identify some tools. And so some of the tools that they had was a fishing, I don't know if you want to call it a fish trap or a fish net, not a net, but it's like a cage. So it's the fish go in, but they can't come out.
Ah, yeah.
And I was looking for it on I took a photo of it, but I'm not quite sure what happened, but I took a photo of it, and it's exactly when I saw it, that was the exact fishing cages that were used in pre-colonial Zimbabwe. So we have people that are out there in Oregon, I don't know, 50 to, I don't know, 70,000 years ago, who were using that technology to fish salmon. And in our pre-colonial culture, we use the same tool, and it is this tool right here. And if you look up the Native Americans in Oregon, it's kind of like a cage. And that is what our ancestors used. So we have a design of how to survive, which is the exact thing from one end of the earth to the other. Thousands of years ago, before airplanes, before boats.
Yeah. Well, that says to me, there's strong evidence to suggest that we once were a global culture, you know, and that global culture was in fact a cultured culture under a serpentine cult, because you find these symbols turning up everywhere in ancient history. So of course you'll find the same sort of fishing technology from one culture to the next, because they also said in Chinese mythology, the dragons taught them everything. They taught them how to read, write, paint, and fish, right? They said they taught them the art of fishing and hunting, weapons and forging of tools, and yielding of irons and metals from the earth was also technologies and information given to us by the dragons when they started teaching humanity and building their systems of societies.
Yeah, that's absolutely fascinating. I can see how all of this is linked together. And when you stop to think about it, when you look at one of my old favorite pastimes when I first came to the UK, is I enjoyed listening to tribal music. And, you know, like in Zimbabwe, we got music that we play with the drum. Basically, most instruments in tribal era seem to be able to hit the same note. So they either got an instrument like a string. We've all got the drum, which can be found in the Celts. The Celts have got a similar instruments. We find it within Africa, and also the natives have the same instruments as well. But I also what I found fascinating, which is I forget the name of the thing, the theory of that we were all one, the Earth, like before the tectonic plates shifted, which seems to make a lot of sense in regards to our 494.
Continental drift, tectonic. Yeah.
The continent was called Pangaea.
Pangaea, that's the one. And when you start looking at the evidence of the different animals, like the way the lion would have evolved in Colorado, for example, in comparison to the savannah, the grasslands of the savannah for its survival, when they were doing these different experiments, when they made the liger, it was, when they took the tiger is amazing in its environment. The lion's amazing in its environment, so it made this super massive thing, but it couldn't hunt. It was too big, it was too slow, and they had to feed it, unfortunately, and wasn't able to survive. So clearly, a lot of the evolution of each of these species was based upon their actual environment.
Exactly. Yeah.
But what was frightening is that when you listen to the native, you know, American Indians doing their native dance and they're chanting for the rain, because like we all, for obvious reasons, would chant for rain because we want our stuff to grow and to survive. The way they dance, the way they, if you watch the Zulus dance, you just take away, you just listen to them screaming, dancing, and then you listen to the native Indians doing a screaming, dancing in reverence. It's not that far apart. It's not something that you'd think they're a world away. but
No.
technically, geographically, they are worlds away, and it's these things, these are the type of things that brings it all back together, like you were saying about the language, the dragons and everything else, that for whatever reason, people struggle to accept that these things are more connected than they want to believe. And
hallmarks there, the rituals, the repetition of the same rituals. And it's funny because it's true. We have the Native Africans have rituals which they use snakes, and funny enough, the Native Americans have these rituals called the snake dance, where they handle snakes and release snakes into the grass for fertility rituals and all sorts. And you start seeing the same hallmarks of the rituals exist in every culture. For example, sacrifice. It's it's quite a specific thing, sacrifice. Think about it. To take an animal, take a human being, and to murder them as an offering to a god. That's not something you and I do every day. It's quite a specific act, yet this very specific act is repeated again and again and again in different cultures and in different ways. And even today, in our ritual celebrations, Christmas, Halloween, Easter, we have symbolic allegories of sacrifice, because the concept of gift giving is a sacrifice, okay? Because you're giving something away that you're never going to retrieve. It's a sacrifice. And there's different ways in which this gets interpreted. For example, at Halloween, you have trick-or-treating, right? They come around, they ask you, and you've got to sacrifice sweets or whatever you're giving away again. What's the other version of this? For example, the Catholics celebrate Lent, where you've got to give something up. You've got to sacrifice something. The concept of sacrifice is allegorically, symbolically encoded through what I would call more socially acceptable forms of the reference, as opposed to perhaps murdering animals or humans. But it's there. You'll find the concept of sacrifice in all cultures. And it's a very specific thing. You can't just say, oh, yeah, it must be coincidence. Sacrifice is a very specific thing. And even in our overall social culture, we have taxation, because you bet that's a sacrifice too. That's exactly what it is. You're sacrificing your sacred labor to the cult for supposed government spending, which really most of it goes into defense spending. So your money is literally in the bullets and bombs that kill people. So yeah, your money is involved in sacrifice. You better believe it. So you can't deny the patterns that keep showing up. And that shows to me that there is a unity there. The unifying point, of course, being the dragons.
And sorry, yeah, just on that, probably the last point, really, really fascinating one, because Brother Tamuka Stanley had asked how we can incorporate this. We both big fan. I find David Icke extremely intriguing. A lot of the stuff that he talks about, I think some of the stuff is so ahead sometimes that it takes time for people to catch on with what he's saying. And in our culture, we have negative spirits like Jikwambo. I don't know what other term we could use to describe them, like negative spirits where people may have to make some form of sacrifice.
Goblins.
Okay, yeah, goblins. And they make some form of sacrifice. And what's interesting, they seem to feed off negative energy. They seem to have to have something horrible. Someone has to die or something, and they will give you all the riches that you want, or they have to have some part or some human part for them to eat. But it's all really nasty, and it's all in the sphere of, and that person, oddly enough, in the village, everyone tends to know who that person is, and then everyone's really afraid of that person, and then there's this negative energy that is associated with that person. Unfortunately, it's a little bit rife in South Africa as well. We hear about it. And similarly in Zimbabwe, there it does exist, all the way up to Western Africa. Is this something, I know your answer, but I need to ask it, is this something that is linked to the dragon? And is it good or bad?
Okay. All of life is duality. I get this one a lot. Oh, the dragon's good, because, if they're all powerful, surely they can't be all good, considering the state of the world. And if they are all good, surely they can't be all powerful, given the state of the world. So are they good or are they bad? And, we only really got the sort of non-dualistic view through Christianity that, you know, there's good and you've got to be good and it's only good that matters, because the bad, oh, that's the devil and that's hell, you've got to stay away from that. And that's sort of the Catholic guilt that's been imbued through modern religion. However, duality in the ancient Egyptian religions was very much, you know, the bad was as relevant as the good. Night was as important as day. Horus and Seth were equal in the pantheon of gods. One was the god of night, one was the god of the sun. And there is absolutely that characteristic when it comes to the dragons, and that sometimes they want to do something good for someone, like a miracle will happen and something out of this world will happen. And sometimes they don't. They're not always benevolent, and I don't think they're also always bad. They are like we are. They say that the gods created us in their image. If the gods of the dragons that create us in their image, aren't we as human beings incredibly dualistic? Because man, we all have darkness in us. We've got the what I call the two wolves, the one of light and, you know, it depends which one you feed. That story, which wolf inside survives, the one you feed, the wolf of light or the wolf of dark, and that's very much what it is. In the way we conduct ourselves, we take responsibility for our lives, that what we put out, you bet if you're putting out lots of negative shit, you're making dragon food, friend. That's the reality. You are feeding the darkness. And there are absolutely some very hungry, vampiric, energetic entities that feed off people and insinuate negative situations into life in order to create what I call dragon loosh, you know, so that they can vampire this. I mean, even the concept of vampires are based on dragon mythology, but it is very much a case of they are parasitic organisms and they need to feed. And the thing they like more than anything else, because they're low vibrational entities in the fourth dimension, is low vibrational frequencies, which are obtained from fear, hate, guilt, all those kind of feelings. Whereas, you know, the higher vibrational feelings, love, gratitude, happiness, that's not where they exist. So if you stay in a higher vibrational frequency and you put out more of the love vibration, which is the opposite of the fear vibration, that's what they eat. That's what they feed off. But there are those people who are tied into karmic contracts with these things and have a lot of bad luck. You know, typically what you'd call people who are cursed. Have attachments. I know I've come across many people in my life who have so-called demonic or dragon attachments that are feeding off them and causing them a lot of distress in their lives.
Yeah, I have because for me, the idea of the reptilians, it's not something that I just only researched. It's something that actually happened in my personal life, and I experienced them. But at the time when I experienced them, I was more in tune spiritually in a Christian sense. I didn't quite understand what I wanted, but it certainly was not going to church, or it was that those energies were not coming from church because of the vibe. You know, at the time when I went to church, and you go there's politics after church. You know, there's where the rich folks hang out, and then there's, you know, where the poorer folks hang out. There's all this kind of, you know, beef and jealousy, and, you know, who's got the nicest car. It was not resonating with me. So I took it on a personal level to have my own personal relationship with the higher forces. And it got me to a point of just humbly going out and spreading the love, you know, at a time when I was just living a simple life and unemployed back in Zimbabwe in the high density area. And I was, you know, reaching out to people and praying for them, and stumbled into a hospital. We ended up doing evangelism in hospitals, and automatically we dispersed, and I ended up into a pediatric ward where there was a kid, you know, all of a sudden, what's that disease where infants, you know, their head starts swelling, build up of fluid, and it looks like it's a very painful experience. did my short prayer for the kid, and felt propelled to fast and to pray and to just continue to just concentrate on this kid. True story. In less than a week, the kid, his head was back to normal just by visiting him every day until I think 4 or 5 days later. His head was back to normal. It was on Friday when the doctor said on a Saturday he would be discharged from hospital. And there was no explanation as to how this happened, because what they were doing was that I think once in every month or twice every month they would drain that fluid. That's the only way that the child's head would at least get back to normal. But something drained the fluid out of that kid. The doctor was surprised. The mom was surprised, and I would just go back home, and I would go to because there's a lot of sacred areas in Zimbabwe where there's balancing rocks, and I would just spend my time there, and I would concentrate on the kid, and I would just. And that was a miracle. I was just like, oh, geez, I'm like 17 or 18, and is this me? And that very day, when the kid had one more day that he was going to be discharged, as soon as I got home, I got into sleep paralysis, and I saw them. At that time, I couldn't articulate what they were, but they were coming after me. They looked like they were tall, really tall, like 12 feet, and they had this kind of reddish, scalish pigment. Their eyes were definitely serpent-looking, very ugly. I don't think I've seen anything as ugly as what I saw while I was under sleep paralysis. And I knew that I wasn't sleeping. I knew that I was awake, but I couldn't move. And they were coming after me. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but they were pointing fingers, and they were extremely, extremely violated and angry. And I knew that it was just like, why are you interfering with that kid? Get the hell out of that kid's life. And they were coming after me until they almost they had put me in a chokehold. And it's funny. I mean, I couldn't speak, but in my mind, I just remembered the word Jesus, help me, please help me. I said it like 3 times. Bam, I was out of the dream, drenched in sweat, and my brother's walking into the house. I'm trying to alert him what happened to me. He's just not paying attention. And that was the end. I was like, no, I'm not gonna tread on this, on this ground anymore. And that was the end of me and being Christian and all that. But I'm not trying to. That's why in my quest for truth and in the restoration, I'm really not throwing out the Southern African Christian community, because I understand them, and I believe that there's a part of Christianity that's trying to nurture high vibration, if you want to put it in that sense. They might be a little off on things like Jesus and the prayer and all the negative symbolisms from the Vatican that started Christianity anyways. But I believe that there's more to all these religions and people seeking truth, which is high vibrational and which is essential to assist us in the restoration. And that's why I don't really fight Christians, and I don't really fight Muslims. And I mean, because for the Catholic Church, which is like the most corrupt of Christianity, we did have people like Mother Teresa, really positive people coming out. And I do hear of Catholicism, which I'm not quite sure if how credible it is, but they do have priests that what do you call it, that drive demons out of people.
Exorcists, I think.
Exorcists, yeah. So
yeah. That's I'm also very tolerant of the religion thing with people. Um, I don't want to per se. I say to people, it's fine if you want to live in a mental prison of belief structure. Um, it's fine. Just I don't want to share that prison with you. However, the one thing I can say is that I don't disagree with anything that Jesus supposedly said or wrote, and that his lessons on compassion and forgiveness, I think, are all very relevant. There is something, I hate the New Age term Christ consciousness, but I do think that there is innately a vein of truth that permeates through most major religions. Otherwise, there's got to be some truth that draws people there. There's got to be something that resonates with people on a soul level. Otherwise, why would they commit so deeply to it? So yes, I agree with you. There is that element of light, and there is something. I don't dismiss any religion altogether. I think there's something to be learned from each and every one of them. Even, for example, the Jewish tradition of not eating pork. They've got something in that whole thing. It's not terribly good for you, first off. But but bacon's delicious. But never mind. They've got this thing where they don't eat pork. They don't, and the Muslims also do not eat pork. And I think there's something to it. Some of their cultural beliefs have practical application. It's not all just cult ritualism. So I take something from all of them, and I learn from all of them. And because I pay so much attention to different religions, I can see the common root of all of them, which is, of course, archaeolatry. And archaeolatry was ultimately the serpent worship religion, which involved sacrifice, but what it was about control. And that is ultimately what all religion is about. It's about controlling the mind. It's getting people to believe. If you can get people to believe in the man in the sky on the cloud with the tablets of 10 rules that you must not break, and you can get them to believe in such abstract concepts, you can get them to believe anything. Then you've got them under control. So religion, like most mechanisms within society, has largely been used as a mechanism of control. I don't agree with the institution of the church per se. There's a lot of child trafficking and stuff that goes on, child rapes, sacrifices and abuses, and it has gone on historically. You just have to go back to the Inquisition and the way the church went after the Protestants, for example, and murdered people just because they wanted to believe in a different brand of Christianity, Protestantism instead of Catholicism. And you still have this dichotomy playing out today in Ireland, the Protestants and the Catholics, and it still goes on. And I think religion has largely been the root of many wars throughout history as well. And for me, I just don't see the virtue of it anymore. The spiritual aspects, perhaps, but then I also hold the strong belief that spirituality is a very personal thing. It's not something that I need to wear a cross on my chest. Oh, I'm so spiritual, I believe in Jesus. That's not me. I think people who feel the need to externalize and make that part of their external locus of identity, they don't really know who they are inside. I know who I am. I understand my spiritual orientation, and I don't need to justify it to anybody else. That is how comfortable I am with it. That, I think, ultimately, to know yourself is the highest form of spirituality.
Wow, that's extremely deep. I love that, how we came full circle. And that's something that I've seen David Icke speak about in his interviews as well, when he speaks about love and basically the higher level of vibration. And sadly, it doesn't take a super probing mind to take into account that some of these archons need this form of energy, this form of sacrifice, and it happens to be these big mega churches that seem to be involved in some of the most debased, horrible forms of injustice and the most vulnerable people of our society, so yeah. But yeah, it's been an amazing interview. We managed to clock maybe, I think, just over 3 hours. I think definitely it's something that we should do again. Loads of fantastic sound bites. And I don't know if anyone else has got any last bits to say. Sorry, Mel, you're on mute.
So I have so much to share with you guys. I'm really proud of the project that you've got going, and my research I think has really got a place with you with your initiative. So I'd love to come and actually do some more presentations. It's of great honor to me to have people of African descent who take an interest in my work. I feel absolutely privileged to have your attention and your ears in this, because you are the people that I've been trying to reach for so long. Because you're the people who've been deprived of your true heritage for far too long. I grew up in South Africa. I know how the predominant white people attitude was so dismissive towards our fellow Africans. And I came out of the culture that was formed by the Nelson Mandela Rainbow Nation mindset, where I was colorblind, and I really feel the need to restore the balance by educating the children of Africa about the truth of their heritage and their history, and empower them with, this is how great we once were, or Black Africans, this is how great you once were, all right? Everything that's been told about you is an absolute bloody lie. But at the same time, there's no need to be angry, because not all of the white people are bad people. There's people like me out there who genuinely see what's been done to you guys, and who genuinely wants to contribute to the restoration of your heritage. And it's something that I'm passionate about. It's something that will consume me for the rest of my life. It's something that I want to raise funding towards, going out to Africa, making documentaries to educate people. Like, I would love to go out and document where Atlantis is, because I can show it to you. I know exactly where it is, and show you how it ties into the ancient cultures of Ethiopia and all of that, because that's the next part of my book. But there's only so much you can show in a book. I really would love to get a camera on the ground and document this properly for future generations, for posterity, because this is not something that's part of anyone's curriculum or educational syllabus. So you don't know that one of the greatest cities in history, legendary cities of the world, it's fascinated people. It's a subject that everyone has spoken about, is actually in Africa. And that Africa was the center of the world, probably with the most advanced civilizations to have ever existed. And that's provable through the artwork, such as the Benin bronzes, such as the Egyptian culture, and the pyramids, and which are way older than 5,000 years. So there is all this there, and we've got little bits of there's the pyramids, and probably they're older than they should be. And then there's those stone circles down Michael Television talks about. They're pretty damn old. And then there's Sazilo Hills, and hey, that's 70,000 years old. So we're starting to get an idea of all these little dots around Africa of, okay, there was something here once, and it was incredible. Now we need to kind of really focus on building a bigger picture anthropologically by getting on the ground and doing proper research as to how this all looked, what was really there. And I think there's a lot still to be discovered. People have just kind of ignored Africa for so long. But I reckon if we take one of those LiDAR machines, they shoot lasers from the sky to the earth over places like the Congo, we'll find massive pyramids and hidden cities and in those virgin forests there. And I reckon even further south, if we start doing it in the Sahara Desert, you'd be amazed, and the Kalahari, you'd be amazed at the structures that start to emerge. And we can then piece together, the history that we've lost.
Yeah, that's absolutely amazing. And on that note, I think the other day, actually, on the news, they were looking over Stonehenge. And when they started doing some work, I don't know if you spotted it a couple of days ago, they were saying that they found that there's loads of underground structures. So they were, as much as we were all fascinated with what's going on the top, they found that underneath, like, whoa, there's a lot of more things there at play. And I think that's something that may be very, very true in great, like for Zimbabwe anyway. Matopos and Mapungubu and all those places, but it seems there's legends of our ancestors going through war, and then during a war they'll just go into the mountain or vanish in the caves. Where do they go? Were they supernatural, or do they Was there weird hidden stargates we don't know about? Or genuinely, is there underground labyrinths that we just don't know about? We don't know how to navigate them, and we just don't have the technology to uncover it today. So that would be just amazing. It'll be fantastic. I wish we could do one with you like every week, or at least minimum 2 with you every month, if your time permits you. So we'd be keen to do that.
Love to. Be great. Thank you.
Yeah, and it'll be literally just between me and Stan, and because like we love it. We're just like big kids when you know what I mean. We live for this.
It's great to play with you guys in your kiddie playpen. This information for me is constantly intriguing, and it's great to have people who, you know, finally we've got people, African students of African descent, who are getting into this stuff and pulling it apart and looking at it and wanting the knowledge, because ultimately, you know, it's up to all of us to heal the perceptions of damaged generations that have, you know, inherited this earth, because they fed such rubbish in the education systems and on TV. It really is up to us to try and heal the perceptions of these people with truth. That's the only thing that does it, you know? It's the only way we heal.
That's the thing. That is the fundamental truth. And part of my journey was propelled by my interestingly, he's a martial arts teacher, and he got adopted by the Malay. He's of Saxon origin, and he's a practicing pagan, but even though he's Malay and he practices whatever they practice there as well. And he's always made me say, like, he always had that thing, know thyself. What did your ancestors do? Do you know, like his surname, he would tell me the reason why his surname have, like, people would have, certain archers would have certain names because of their ability to pull certain poundage bows. So their names, their surnames would be based upon that. And that sparked that level of interest in me. Like, why will we name this? Why do we have certain totems? Why is it linked to this? And then all of a sudden you start seeing that we have more similarities than differences. It's only this seemingly new, it's not that new, but you know, with the Jesuits, it seems like this artificial existence that has been superimposed on humanity that is not natural, it's not good for us, it is poisonous, and it pulls us away from a holistic, natural form of life. I mean, we all do die, but like, we live a little bit of a better life. You don't need to survive with vaccination, and we enjoy your existence. And I hope that we get an opportunity to do this again sooner rather than later. I'm pretty sure Stanley will be on the case as well, sorting out the dates.
Cool. Thank you, guys. It's been great to speak to you. And we'll do this again. Lots more to come.
Definitely. Really appreciate it. And for all our viewers on Facebook, thank you for staying with us. And if you do this whole thing, you can watch both parts and put your comments and ask questions. Mel's a member of us with us, and when I'm top of restoration, so if she spots the questions, she will do her best to get to them as well. You know, so that is part of the massive global community that we're going to be now, this is the power with us being combined. You know, so yeah, looking forward to it, and I hope we all have a wonderful evening. Thanks a lot, Mel. Thank you, Stan, and have a great night.
Thank you, guys. Mwah. Lots of love.
Yeah.
Thank you.